I'm going to destroy everything you love." The words hung in the air between them. Oliver Hayes hadn't actually spoken them aloud, but the truth burned in his throat as he stared at the volunteer badge in his trembling hand. St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the exact building his company was set to demolish in just 2 weeks. The $300 million luxury development deal that would make his shareholders millions. The impediment his team had been working to remove for months. The place where Zara, the woman who had rescued him from the storm, devoted her weekends to helping sick children. Lightning flashed, illuminating Zara's confused expression as she watched him from across her small living room. She had no idea who he really was. No idea that the rain-soaked stranger she'd welcomed into her home was the same person signing the papers to bulldoze the hospital where those children fought for their lives. "Everything okay?" she asked, stepping closer. Oliver felt his carefully constructed world cracking beneath him. For the first time in his ruthless climb to the top, the mighty CEO of Hayes Enterprises was absolutely terrified, not of losing money, but of losing something he hadn't even realized he'd found. 72 hours earlier, Oliver Hayes woke to the sound of waves, not from the ocean but from the $30,000 sound system installed in his bedroom walls, programmed to ease him awake at precisely 5 a.m. The penthouse apartment, occupying the entire top floor of the Hayes Tower, offered a panoramic view of Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows that automatically adjusted their tint as dawn broke over the city. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," came the digitized voice of his smart home system. "It's Monday, June 8th. Temperature outside is 68 degrees. Your calendar shows 7 meetings today, beginning with the St. Mary's acquisition update at 8 a.m. Oliver stepped onto heated marble floors, his bare feet never experiencing the cold that ordinary people felt. His morning ritual proceeded with military precision. 20 minutes of high-intensity training with his AI fitness program, a protein shake prepared by his meal service, and a 7-minute shower in water infused with vitamins and minerals. By 5:45 a.m., he stood before his closet where suits worth more than some people's yearly salaries hung in perfect alignment. He selected a charcoal brioni, custom-tailored to emphasize his athletic build, a build maintained not for health but for power. In the corporate world, physical weakness suggested mental weakness, and Oliver Hayes showed neither. As he knotted his Hermes tie, Oliver glanced at his reflection. At 42, he looked younger, another asset he'd invested in maintaining. His face showed none of the stress from 18-hour workdays or hostile takeovers. What it also didn't show was joy. His eyes, sharp and calculating, revealed nothing but cool assessment, even when looking at himself. His phone buzzed. A text from his executive assistant. Chinese investors moved their timeline up. "Need decision on St. Mary's today." Oliver's jaw tightened. One hospital standing in the way of a $300 million development. One signature needed to remove the obstacle. "Tell him it's done," he typed back. Decision made in less than 3 seconds. That's how Oliver Hayes became the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Decisive, ruthless, efficient. By 6:30 a.m., his driver had the Bentley waiting. Oliver slid into the back seat, already reviewing projections on his tablet. He owned half of Manhattan, yet he barely saw it through the tinted windows. The city was simply assets and opportunities, numbers on spreadsheets, properties to acquire and leverage. What he never noticed were the people, the heartbeat of the city. The same way he never noticed the emptiness of his own life. "The Children's Hospital Board rejected our final offer," Miranda Steele announced, sliding a folder across the polished conference table. As Hayes Enterprises' chief counsel, she'd spent 15 years executing Oliver's most aggressive acquisitions. They're claiming community essential service status. The Hayes Tower executive boardroom fell silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan like a scale model below them, a city Oliver had been systematically conquering since inheriting his father's modest real estate firm 20 years ago and transforming it into a global powerhouse. "Community essential," Oliver repeated, the words tasting bitter. "That property sits on prime Manhattan real estate worth 40 times what they're using it for. Their community essential status is costing my shareholders millions every month. It remains a hospital instead of luxury condominiums." He stood, walking to the window. 60 stories below, people moved like insects, inconsequential to the decisions being made above them. "The Chinese consortium needs an answer today," said James Porter, his CFO, a man whose moral compass had been replaced with a calculator years ago. "If we can't deliver the St. Mary's property, they'll pull their funding and invest in Chicago instead." Oliver turned, scanning the faces around the table. 12 executives, each earning 7 or 8 figures annually. each waiting for him to solve this problem. None would suggest backing down. That wasn't how Hayes Enterprises operated. None would mention the children receiving treatment at the hospital. That wasn't relevant to the bottom line. "What are our options?" Oliver asked, though he already knew the answer. Miranda straightened her designer blazer. "We've exhausted legal channels. The zoning board won't budge, while the hospital maintains public support. Then we change public support," Oliver said coolly. "The hospital's operating costs have increased 22% in the last quarter. Their primary donor is experiencing financial difficulties. We made sure of that. Within 6 months, they'll be operating at a deficit." He returned to his seat, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the table. "I want the narrative changed. St. Mary's isn't failing because we're forcing them out. They're failing because healthcare is inefficient. Our development brings jobs, tax revenue, economic growth. We're the solution, not the problem." Heads nodded around the table. This was why they followed Oliver, his ability to reshape reality itself. "Make it happen," he said, closing the folder. "I want demolition contracts ready within 30 days. Oliver, your ex-wife's attorney called again about the foundation gala," his personal assistant informed him as he strode through the executive floor, where employees avoided eye contact as he passed. "Tell Claire if she wants access to the Hayes Foundation checkbook, she can stop trying to renegotiate the divorce settlement," Oliver replied without breaking stride. "And cancel my dinner with the mayor. Reschedule for next week when I have the St. Mary's solution to present." His office, larger than most Manhattan apartments, offered views in 3 directions through bulletproof glass. Modern art worth millions adorned the walls, selected not for his taste but for their investment value. Nothing in Oliver's world existed without purpose. Nothing was chosen for pleasure alone. His desk phone rang. Only 3 people had this direct number. "I hear you're having trouble with a children's hospital." Gregory Chambers's raspy voice came through the speaker. As Oliver's mentor and the company's largest outside investor, the 78-year-old was the only person who spoke to Oliver without deference. "A temporary setback," Oliver replied. "There's no such thing as temporary in this business, only winners and losers." The old man coughed, a reminder of the lung cancer eating away at him. "Your father would have had this hospital issue resolved months ago." Oliver's jaw tightened. 20 years as CEO, and still his father's ghost haunted every conversation with the old guard. "My father's methods aren't necessary anymore," Oliver said coolly. "We have more sophisticated approaches now." "Your father understood that sentiment is the enemy of success," Chambers retorted. "These hospital people believe their cause is righteous. You need to show them that righteousness doesn't pay the bills." After ending the call, Oliver stared at the scale model of the luxury development planned for the St. Mary's site. 3 towers of glass and steel, 300 ultra-luxury residences, each selling for 8 figures minimum. A monument to success that would bear the Hayes name for generations. One children's hospital stood in the way. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, your brother's on line 2. Oliver sighed. The prodigal son calling again. "Tell Michael I'm in meetings all day. He says it's about your mother's birthday this weekend. Send the usual arrangement to her grave, and book a reservation at Le Bernardin for one. I'll have dinner with her memory instead of listening to Michael's guilt trips." Even his assistant's voice softened. "Yes, sir." The executive team gathered for the 4 p.m. strategy session in what they privately called the War Room, a windowless conference space where Hayes Enterprises' most aggressive takeovers were planned. "We have 3 paths forward with St. Mary's," Miranda began, distributing tablets with the presentation already loaded. "Legal, which we've exhausted. Financial pressure, which is ongoing. And public relations, which needs acceleration." Oliver scanned the room. In addition to his usual team, he'd invited Daniel Mercer, head of his PR division, a man who had successfully convinced the public that displacing 200 families from affordable housing for a luxury hotel was actually a community improvement. "Daniel, make me the good guy in this story," Oliver instructed. Mercer nodded confidently. "We've already begun placing stories about healthcare inefficiency. Next week, we release a report showing how the St. Mary's property could generate enough tax revenue to fund 3 hospitals in outer boroughs where space is more affordable." "Opposition?" Oliver asked. "The usual activists," Mercer shrugged. "We're countering with economic impact studies, jobs created, revenue generated. By next month, anyone defending that hospital will look like they're against economic growth." "It's not enough," Oliver said, standing to pace the room. "I need this obstacle removed now, not next month." The room fell silent. Everyone recognized Oliver's tone, impatience that preceded his most ruthless decisions. James Porter cleared his throat. There is another option. The hospital's infrastructure is aging, their water system, electrical grid, all outdated. A health and safety inspection with the right inspector could find them temporarily unsuitable for patient care. Forcing immediate patient relocation, Miranda continued, catching on immediately. Once emptied, reoccupation becomes much more difficult, Porter finished. Oliver stopped pacing. Make the call. No one questioned the ethics. No one mentioned the disruption to sick children and their families. At Hayes Enterprises, obstacles were meant to be removed. People were collateral damage in the pursuit of progress. I want daily updates, Oliver said, ending the meeting. The Chinese delegation arrives next week. I plan to serve them champagne on the hospital rooftop after they sign the development deal. If you'll just sign here, Mr. Hayes. Oliver's fountain pen hovered over the document, the last authorization needed for the health and safety inspection that would empty St. Mary's Children's Hospital within 2 weeks. His signature would set in motion events that would displace dozens of sick children, terminate hundreds of healthcare workers, and convert a healing space into luxury condominiums. He signed without hesitation, the gold nib gliding across the paper like a scalpel. Thunder rumbled outside his corner office. The weather forecast had predicted severe storms, but Oliver barely noticed. Natural forces were inconveniences to be managed, not respected. Your car is waiting, sir, his assistant said from the doorway. Though the Weather Service just issued a severe storm warning for Manhattan. Perhaps you'd like the driver to take you home? I'm taking the Ferrari, Oliver replied, sliding on his Italian leather jacket. The investors' dinner isn't until 8. I'm going to the club first. Sir, the storm. Weather is for people who don't have indoor parking, Oliver cut her off, pocketing his keys. The executive elevator whisked him to the private garage beneath Hayes Tower. His collection of automobiles, each worth more than most Americans' homes, gleamed under specialty lighting. He selected the midnight blue Ferrari, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying growl that echoed through the concrete structure. As he accelerated up the ramp and into the Manhattan evening, rain began to fall, first as scattered drops, then as sheets against his windshield. Other drivers slowed, but Oliver pressed the accelerator harder. Weather was just another competitor trying to dictate terms to him. His phone rang through the car's sound system. Ace, he answered curtly. Oliver, it's Michael. About Mom's birthday? Not now, Michael. The wipers struggled against the downpour. You say that every time. For once in your life, could you? Oliver disconnected the call as lightning cracked overhead. The sky darkened prematurely, the storm intensifying with each passing minute. Traffic congested as cautious drivers sought shelter. Oliver, impatient as always, veered onto a side street, seeking faster passage through residential areas. It was a decision that would alter the course of his perfectly controlled existence, though the mighty CEO didn't know it yet. As thunder boomed overhead and rain obscured his vision, Oliver Hayes was about to learn that some forces can't be conquered, only survived, and that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find what you never knew you needed. Lightning split the darkening Manhattan sky as the first emergency alert blared across Oliver's Ferrari dashboard. Severe weather warning, flash flooding expected throughout Manhattan and surrounding boroughs. All citizens advised to seek immediate shelter, avoid unnecessary travel. Oliver dismissed the notification with an irritated tap. Weather alerts were for ordinary people who lacked the resources to overcome nature's inconveniences. Through the Ferrari's windshield, he watched pedestrians scurrying for cover, clutching newspapers over their heads, huddling under store awnings. Their panic amused him. Pathetic, he muttered, accelerating through a yellow light. His phone rang again, his executive assistant this time. Mr. Hayes, I've been monitoring the weather alerts. They've upgraded to a severe thunderstorm warning with possible tornado conditions. Perhaps you should cancel my reservation at the club, Oliver interrupted. I'll go straight to the investor dinner. Sir, even the restaurant called. They're suggesting postponement due to... Did I ask for their suggestion? The edge in his voice could have cut steel. Confirm that everyone will be there as planned. Hayes Enterprises doesn't reschedule for rain. Another alert flashed across his dashboard. Flash flood warning, immediate effect. Oliver turned off the notification system entirely. The rain intensified, hammering against the luxury vehicle with increasing violence. Wind gusts pushed against the Ferrari's sleek frame, but Oliver maintained his speed. Nature, like everything else in his world, was simply an obstacle to overcome. Oliver's GPS directed him through an unfamiliar route, supposedly the fastest way to the restaurant given the growing traffic jams throughout Manhattan. As he turned onto a side street, the surroundings changed dramatically. Gone were the gleaming skyscrapers and luxury storefronts, replaced by modest apartment buildings and small businesses with hand-painted signs. "Where the hell am I?" he muttered, peering through the windshield as the rain pounded harder. His Ferrari splashed through growing puddles, water spraying from beneath the tires. The streets here weren't draining properly, a symptom of infrastructure that hadn't received the investment more affluent neighborhoods commanded. Under normal circumstances, Oliver would have noticed this as a potential development opportunity. Tonight, it registered only as an annoyance. Lightning struck a transformer ahead, sending blue-white sparks cascading into the flooded street. The power grid flickered, then failed. Block by block, lights disappeared until the neighborhood plunged into darkness, illuminated only by car headlights and sporadic lightning flashes. Oliver checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than the annual rent of any apartment on this street. 19 minutes to dinner, plenty of time. The Ferrari's engine suddenly coughed, then sputtered. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard. "No, not now," Oliver growled, pressing the accelerator harder, as if willpower alone could overcome mechanical failure. The car lurched forward, then shuddered violently. Smoke began rising from beneath the hood, visible even through the downpour. The Ferrari crawled forward another 50 feet before the engine died completely, leaving Oliver stranded in rising water on a darkened street in a neighborhood where his name on a building meant nothing. Come on," Oliver hissed, turning the key repeatedly. The engine clicked weakly but refused to start. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, an unusual display of emotion from a man who prided himself on iron control. Rain hammered the roof with increasing intensity. Water was now reaching halfway up the Ferrari's tires, still rising. Through the streaming windshield, Oliver could make out unfamiliar surroundings. Modest homes with small front yards, now becoming shallow ponds as drainage systems failed under the deluge. He reached for his phone to call his driver, then froze. No signal. The storm had knocked out cell towers, or perhaps this neighborhood had poor coverage, another sign of its economic status that would normally never intersect with Oliver's carefully curated existence. Frustration rose within him, an unfamiliar feeling for a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. He tried the engine once more, but the Ferrari remained stubbornly silent, now nothing more than an extraordinarily expensive metal box trapping him in rising floodwaters. For the first time in years, Oliver Hayes faced a problem his money couldn't immediately solve. Oliver stepped out of the Ferrari, instantly regretting his decision as rain drenched his $5,000 suit. Water reached his ankles, soaking through Italian leather shoes that had never experienced puddles deeper than a spilled cocktail. The wind whipped his carefully styled hair into disarray, pelting his face with stinging raindrops. He surveyed his surroundings, calculating options. The neighborhood appeared solidly middle class, not the poverty-stricken areas he demolished for development, but certainly not where Manhattan's elite resided. Children's bicycles leaned against porches. American-made cars occupied driveways. Modest holiday decorations from seasons past still clung to some homes. Lives lived without the luxury of paid decorators or seasonal refreshes. Lightning illuminated the street sign, Willow Avenue. Oliver didn't recognize it. This neighborhood existed outside his mental map of Manhattan, in one of those areas his driver traversed while Oliver focused on emails in the back seat. A wave of genuine fear, an emotion so unfamiliar it took him moments to identify, washed over him. His phone remained useless. His car, dead. His surroundings unknown. For a man who controlled billion-dollar empires from his fingertips, this helplessness felt like drowning. The rain intensified further, if that was even possible. Wind bent trees at alarming angles. Debris, branches, trash cans, someone's garden gnome, floated past in the rising water, now approaching his knees. He needed shelter. Now. Oliver splashed toward the nearest house, a modest 2-story with warm light glowing from behind curtained windows. Unlike the surrounding homes, this one still had power, perhaps a generator, he thought. The small front yard featured a meticulously maintained garden, now partially submerged beneath the floodwater. The security systems protecting Oliver's various residences required fingerprint recognition, facial scanning, and numerical codes. This home had a simple brass knocker, a lion's head that had seen decades of use. Oliver raised it and brought it down 3 times, each knock more urgent than the last. No response. He knocked again, harder this time, the sound barely audible above the thunder and pounding rain. Water continued rising around him, now soaking his suit pants to mid-thigh. The temperature was dropping. He felt the first shiver of cold penetrating his drenched clothing. Finally, movement behind the frosted glass panels of the front door. A shadow approached cautiously. "Who's there?" A woman's voice, firm but cautious. "My car broke down," Oliver called out, struggling to keep the desperation from his voice. "I need to use a phone." The door opened slightly, secured by a chain. A woman peered through the gap, assessing the stranger on her doorstep. Oliver Hayes, whose mere presence commanded immediate respect in boardrooms worldwide, stood dripping and disheveled before her. His $1,000 haircut plastered to his head, his bespoke suit clinging awkwardly to his frame, his hand-stitched shoes possibly ruined beyond salvation. Without the trappings of his office or the aura of his wealth, he appeared almost ordinary, just a man caught in a storm. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "The power's out across the neighborhood. Landlines aren't working and cell service is down." "My car," Oliver insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the Ferrari, barely visible through the downpour. "I need to call for assistance." Another lightning strike illuminated the scene, followed immediately by thunder that shook the ground beneath them. The storm was directly overhead now. The woman hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of allowing a stranger into her home against leaving someone stranded in a dangerous storm. "You can wait inside until the worst passes," she finally said, removing the chain. "But I don't have phone service either." As she pulled the door open wider, Oliver stepped across the threshold into a world as foreign to him as another country, a modest home filled with warmth, character, and evidence of a life lived with purpose rather than acquisition. And as the door closed behind him, shutting out the raging storm, Oliver Hayes couldn't possibly know that this moment, this random intersection of wealth and simplicity, power and compassion, would become the dividing line between everything he had been and everything he might become. "You're completely drenched," the woman said, closing the door against the howling wind. "Wait here. I'll get you a towel." Oliver stood dripping on the entryway rug, water pooling around his ruined shoes. The home's interior was dimly lit by scattered candles and a battery-powered lantern, casting warm shadows across walls adorned with framed photographs and what appeared to be children's artwork. She returned moments later with a fluffy blue towel, nothing like the Egyptian cotton that stocked his multiple residences, but dry at least. "Thank you," Oliver said stiffly, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. When was the last time he genuinely thanked someone? His world operated on expectations and obligations, not gratitude. "I'm Zara," she said, watching as he patted his face dry. "Zara Winters." "Oliver Hayes," he replied automatically, waiting for the flash of recognition his name usually triggered. None came. Instead, Zara simply nodded and gestured toward his shoes. "You might want to take those off before you come in further. They look expensive, though probably ruined now." Oliver glanced down at his handmade Italian loafers, now waterlogged beyond salvation. "They're just shoes," he said dismissively, though the pair had cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Just shoes that probably cost more than my car," Zara replied with a hint of amusement. "But suit yourself. Just don't track water all over my hardwood floors." The casual authority in her voice surprised him. People didn't tell Oliver Hayes what to do. They asked permission, sought approval, accommodated his preferences. Yet here was this woman, establishing rules in her domain without the slightest hesitation. Oliver removed his shoes, feeling strangely vulnerable in his wet socks on an unfamiliar floor. In the improved lighting of Zara's living room, Oliver could properly see his rescuer for the first time. She appeared to be in her early 30s, several years younger than him. Her dark hair fell in natural waves past her shoulders, currently pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup accentuated her features, yet her skin glowed with natural health. Her eyes, a striking hazel that shifted between green and gold in the candlelight, regarded him with intelligent curiosity. She wore simple jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, NYU, he noted automatically, categorizing information as he always did. Her feet were bare, toenails painted a cheerful yellow that seemed incongruous with the raging storm outside. Nothing about her suggested wealth or status, the metrics by which Oliver automatically assessed everyone he met. Yet, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that puzzled him. People without power or money typically demonstrated deference in his presence. Zara showed none. "So, Mr. Hayes, what brings someone in a suit that expensive to this neighborhood during the storm of the century?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. "Business dinner," he replied curtly. "GPS routed me through here to avoid traffic." "In a Ferrari," she added with a raised eyebrow. I caught a glimpse before you came in. Not exactly the typical vehicle around these parts. It's reliable transportation, Oliver said defensively. Except when it isn't, Zara countered with a small smile. Oliver felt a strange discomfort under her direct gaze, as though she was assessing him and finding him wanting. He was accustomed to people being intimidated by him, not the reverse. The storm should pass quickly, he said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. I won't inconvenience you long. It's no inconvenience, Zara replied, her expression softening slightly. Though I should warn you, the weather service says this system is stalled over the city. We might be stuck with each other for a while. The thought clearly didn't disturb her, but it sent an uncharacteristic wave of anxiety through Oliver. Stuck in a stranger's home, disconnected from his power structures, stripped of the trappings that defined his identity, it was disorienting in ways he hadn't experienced since childhood. Would you like some tea? Zara asked, moving toward what Oliver presumed was the kitchen. I have a gas stove, so at least we can have hot beverages despite the power outage. Oliver followed her, his wet socks making embarrassing squelching sounds against the hardwood. The kitchen, like the rest of the home, was modest but well maintained. White cabinets, blue ceramic tiles, and open shelving displaying mismatched mugs and plates. Practical rather than prestigious. A far cry from his own kitchen, with its imported Italian marble and professional-grade appliances he never used. Do you live here alone? Oliver asked, noting the single-place setting in the dish drainer. Just me, Zara confirmed, filling a kettle from the tap. Though my student's artwork takes up enough space for a second person. You're a teacher, Oliver stated rather than asked. Another data point collected. Kindergarten, she replied with unmistakable pride. 6 years now at Westside Elementary. A teacher. One of those professions Oliver categorized as essential but undervalued, necessary for society, but not worth significant compensation. The type of career his wealth insulated him from needing to respect. That explains the... He gestured vaguely at the refrigerator, covered with children's drawings held by alphabet magnets. The joy in my home? Zara suggested, a hint of challenge in her voice. Yes, I suppose it does. The kettle began to whistle, saving Oliver from responding. He took the opportunity to survey the kitchen more carefully. No high-end appliances, no expensive cutlery. The countertops were laminate rather than stone. Everything spoke of careful budgeting and modest means, yet nothing appeared shabby or neglected. Every surface gleamed with care. Fresh herbs grew in small pots along the windowsill. A collection of well-used cookbooks suggested someone who prepared actual meals rather than ordering in or employing a chef. It was functional, warm, lived, in all qualities absent from Oliver's multiple residences. Green or chamomile? Zara asked, holding up 2 tea bags. Do you have coffee? Oliver countered, avoiding the unfamiliar choice. In a power outage? Unless you've got a hand-crank espresso machine hidden in that wet suit, we're having tea tonight. Oliver blinked, unused to having his preferences dismissed so casually. Green, he said finally, accepting the steaming mug she offered. You can hang your jacket over that chair, Zara suggested, nodding toward a wooden kitchen chair. It might actually dry by morning. By morning? Oliver repeated, alarm evident in his voice. I don't intend to stay that long. Zara glanced toward the window, where rain continued to lash violently against the glass. I don't think either of us gets to decide that tonight. The weather service issued a shelter-in-place warning just before you arrived. Streets are flooding throughout the city. I have commitments, Oliver insisted. People expecting me. I'm sure you do, Zara acknowledged. And I'm sure they'll understand when they look outside. She led him back to the living room, where more candles had been lit, creating a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the violent storm outside. A bookshelf lined one wall, not carefully curated first editions like in Oliver's study, but well-read paperbacks with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. Photographs adorned another wall, Zara with groups of small children, Zara hiking in mountains, Zara with an older couple who shared her smile. Lives documented through experiences rather than acquisitions. Before I forget, Zara said, turning toward him with unexpected seriousness, there are rules in this house. Oliver almost laughed. Rules? For him? But her expression stopped him. First, no work calls if the phones come back, not after 9 p.m. The storm may have trapped us together, but I still value my quiet evenings. Second, the bathroom's down the hall, but please conserve water. The pump might fail if the power stays out too long. And third, Her expression softened slightly. If you're going to be a grumpy guest, at least be an entertaining one. I have enough to worry about without adding a brooding stranger to the list. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Oliver Hayes found himself speechless. This kindergarten teacher, in her modest home with her modest income, was setting boundaries for him, the man whose net worth could buy this entire block without denting his portfolio. More surprising still was his own reaction. Instead of dismissal or offense, he felt an unfamiliar twinge of respect. "I suppose I should thank you," he said finally, the words stiff but sincere, "for the shelter." "You're welcome," Zara replied simply. "Now, since we might be stuck with each other for a while, why don't you tell me about this important business dinner you're missing? It must be something special to have you driving through a storm like this." Oliver hesitated, suddenly reluctant to mention that the important business involved finalizing plans to demolish a children's hospital. Something told him Zara Winters might have strong opinions about such matters. "Just a routine investment meeting," he lied, taking a sip of tea. Outside, lightning flashed again, momentarily illuminating the room. For just an instant, Oliver could have sworn he saw something on Zara's bookshelf, a framed photograph of children in hospital gowns standing before a familiar building logo. But the room returned to candlelight before he could be certain, and the moment passed as quickly as the lightning itself. Ladies and gentlemen, are you enjoying this story so far? If you're wondering what will happen when these two completely different worlds collide, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. This channel brings you fresh, compelling stories every week that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss a single twist in Oliver and Zara's unexpected encounter. Like and subscribe now, and hit that notification bell to join the Mr. Ross Story Trail family. Now let's get back to our unlikely pair as the storm forces them to confront their differences. The storm's fury intensified outside, wind howling through tree branches and rain hammering against the windows with renewed vigor. Inside Zara's modest living room, the warm glow of candles created dancing shadows across the walls. The power outage had transformed what would have been a brightly lit evening into something more primitive, more intimate, much to Oliver's discomfort. "Does this happen often in this neighborhood?" Oliver asked, gesturing to the darkness around them. "Power failures. During normal storms?" "Rarely," Zara replied, arranging more candles on the coffee table. "During something like this, everyone loses power eventually, even the fancy high-rises downtown. My buildings have backup generators," Oliver said automatically. "Hayes Tower could power itself for a week without external electricity." "How wonderful for Hayes Tower," Zara responded, her tone neutral but her eyes reflecting the candlelight with a hint of amusement. "Meanwhile, in the world where most people live, we make do with candles and good conversation." She settled onto the sofa, tucking her legs beneath her with casual comfort, while Oliver remained perched awkwardly on an armchair that, while perfectly comfortable, lacked the ergonomic precision of his custom office furniture. "So, Mr. Hayes of Hayes Tower," Zara continued, sipping her tea, "what exactly does one do that affords them Italian suits and sports cars, yet doesn't teach them to check weather forecasts?" Oliver hesitated. His normal response, "I acquire things other people value," suddenly seemed hollow in this candle-lit room where nothing appeared particularly valuable by his usual metrics. "Real estate development," he finally answered. "I transform underutilized properties into more productive assets." "Productive for whom?" Zara asked, her question disarmingly direct. Oliver blinked. People didn't usually question the premise of his work. They asked about profit margins, market trends, expansion plans. Never the fundamental purpose. "For the city," he replied cautiously. "For progress," Zara nodded thoughtfully. Interesting how often progress happens to align with profit. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making both of them glance toward the sound. The storm showed no signs of abating. Oliver checked his watch, a habit more than a necessity since his evening plans were clearly canceled. "Your watch probably costs more than my monthly salary," Zara observed. Oliver instinctively covered the timepiece with his hand. "It was a gift," he lied. In truth, he'd bought it himself after closing a particularly lucrative deal, a $40,000 reward that no one but he would appreciate. "From someone special?" Zara pressed, her eyes reflecting genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "From myself," Oliver admitted, unsure why he'd corrected his own lie. "After a successful project." "Ah," Zara nodded. "I buy myself ice cream after a successful parent-teacher conference. Different strokes, I suppose." The comparison was so absurd that Oliver nearly smiled, a reaction so foreign that he quickly suppressed it. The scale is somewhat different. Is it though? Zara challenged, leaning forward slightly. You measure success in dollars. I measure it in children who learn to read, to think critically, to be kind. Which has more lasting impact? The question hung between them, unanswerable by the metrics Oliver typically employed. ROI calculations and profit projections offered no formula for quantifying what Zara described. We contribute in different ways, he said finally, the diplomatic response feeling inadequate even to his own ears. True, Zara conceded, though I sometimes wonder if all contributions are equally worthwhile. The candlelight softened her features, but couldn't hide the intensity of her gaze, a look that suggested she saw beyond Oliver's carefully constructed facade. It made him profoundly uncomfortable, like being examined under a microscope by someone who could actually see the cells dividing. Are you hungry? Zara asked, mercifully changing the subject. I was about to make dinner when the storm hit. Nothing fancy, but the gas stove still works. Oliver realized he was, in fact, starving. His last meal had been a protein shake at 5:30 that morning. I wouldn't want to impose further, he said stiffly. It's pasta with vegetables from my community garden, Zara replied, already standing. Hardly an imposition to add water to the pot. She moved toward the kitchen, and Oliver followed, unsure of the protocol in this situation. His meals were either catered, delivered, or consumed in restaurants where staff anticipated his needs before he expressed them. The concept of assisting in meal preparation was entirely foreign. Can I help? He offered awkwardly. Zara glanced back, surprise evident on her face. Sure, you can chop the zucchini. She handed him a knife and cutting board, then added with a hint of mischief. Have you ever chopped vegetables before, or do you have people for that? I'm capable of basic food preparation, Oliver replied defensively, though in truth he couldn't remember the last time he'd cut anything more complicated than a steak at a 5-star restaurant. He approached the task as he would any unfamiliar challenge, with determined precision. His cuts were perfectly even, methodical, and painfully slow. Not preparing for a cooking competition, Zara commented, watching his concentrated efforts with amusement. Just need it small enough to cook quickly. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing correctly, Oliver responded automatically, one of his father's many mantras that had shaped his approach to everything. Sometimes good enough is perfectly fine, Zara countered, stirring the pasta with casual expertise. Especially when you're hungry and the power's out during a storm. The concept of good enough was anathema to Oliver's worldview. In his reality, excellence was the minimum acceptable standard and perfection the constant goal. Yet here was this woman, suggesting that precision mattered less than practicality, and somehow making him feel foolish for his meticulousness. They ate by candlelight at Zara's small kitchen table, pasta with garden vegetables and a simple olive oil sauce, served on mismatched plates with utensils that lacked the weighted balance of Oliver's usual sterling silver. Yet the meal itself was surprisingly good, fresh, flavorful, satisfying in a way that many of his expensive restaurant dinners often weren't. He found himself taking second helpings without thinking. Thank you, he said when finished, the words less stiff than before. That was unexpected. High praise indeed, Zara replied with a small smile. Food doesn't need to be expensive to be good, just as homes don't need to be palatial to be comfortable. My chef would disagree, Oliver said, then immediately regretted revealing this detail. You have a personal chef, Zara stated rather than asked. Of course you do. For convenience, Oliver clarified, feeling strangely defensive. My schedule doesn't allow for regular meal preparation. Because chopping vegetables is such a time-consuming process, Zara teased, nodding toward the perfectly diced zucchini he'd labored over. Outside, lightning flashed, followed immediately by a thunderclap so powerful it rattled dishes in the cabinets. Both of them instinctively glanced toward the windows, where rain continued to lash against the glass with undiminished force. I should check for leaks, Zara said, rising from the table. This house is 90 years old. It has character, which unfortunately includes occasional water infiltration during biblical floods. Oliver followed her through the small home, holding a candle as she examined windowsills and ceiling corners with practiced efficiency. The upper floor contained 2 modest bedrooms and a small bathroom with vintage tile. You can take the guest room tonight, Zara said, pointing to a simply furnished space with a twin bed. The sheets are clean, though not Egyptian cotton or whatever you're probably used to. This is more than adequate, Oliver replied, though the room was smaller than his master bathroom. Thank you for your hospitality. Zara paused in the hallway, studying him in the candlelight. You know, for someone who clearly values control and luxury, you're adapting surprisingly well to this situation. I adapt to changing circumstances, Oliver said simply. It's how I succeed. There's a difference between adaptation and acceptance, Zara observed. You're tolerating this situation because you have no choice. That's not the same as appreciating its value. Before Oliver could formulate a response to this unexpectedly philosophical observation, another crash of thunder shook the house and the lights suddenly flickered on, then immediately off again. Tease, Zara muttered toward the ceiling. Then to Oliver, power company's trying at least. Let's head back downstairs. I have a battery-powered radio we can check for updates. The radio crackled with static as Zara tuned it to the emergency broadcast frequency. A serious-voiced announcer confirmed what the continuing storm made obvious. The weather system had stalled over the city, flooding was widespread, and residents were advised to remain sheltered until morning at minimum. Looks like you're stuck with me, Zara said, turning down the volume. Sorry about your important dinner. It's... Oliver began to say inconsequential, but stopped himself. The Chinese investors wouldn't see it that way. Millions of dollars and months of planning now jeopardized because of weather. His phone remained without signal, leaving him completely disconnected from the consequences unfolding in his absence. Strangely, he found himself not entirely concerned. The immediate reality of this candlelit room, with its bookshelf full of well-read novels and framed photographs of smiling faces, seemed more concrete than the abstract financial implications of his missed meeting. It's business, he finished lamely. It can wait. Zara raised an eyebrow. From your earlier panic, I assumed the fate of nations rested on your dinner attendance. Companies, not nations, Oliver corrected without thinking. Ah, my mistake, Zara replied with gentle sarcasm. Merely companies. How could I confuse the two? Her ability to mock him without malice, to challenge his self-importance while simultaneously offering him shelter and food, created a confusing mixture of irritation and reluctant respect within Oliver. Do you always speak so directly to strangers? He asked. Only to those who seem like they rarely hear the unvarnished truth, Zara replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Something tells me the people in your world are more concerned with pleasing you than being honest with you. The accuracy of her assessment was unsettling. Oliver's world was indeed filled with people who anticipated and accommodated his preferences, who cushioned him from inconvenience or contradiction. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him as Zara did, as an equal rather than as Oliver Hayes, CEO? He couldn't remember. As candles burned lower and the storm continued its assault outside, Oliver found himself in the most unfamiliar territory of all, a space where his wealth, power, and status meant nothing, where the currency was authenticity rather than assets. And for a man who owned half of Manhattan, he was beginning to feel unexpectedly bankrupt. Oliver woke to unfamiliar sounds, birds chirping, distant voices, and someone moving quietly downstairs. The modest guest bedroom came into focus as morning light filtered through curtains that hadn't been opened. For a disorienting moment, he couldn't place himself. Then the previous night's events flooded back. The storm, the breakdown, Zara. His phone still showed no service, though the battery had drained to 12% overnight. Useless. He rose from the twin bed, narrower than any he'd slept in since childhood, and moved to the window. Drawing back the curtains revealed a neighborhood transformed. The floodwaters had receded, leaving debris scattered across lawns and sidewalks. Downed branches rested where they'd fallen. Neighbors were already outside, assessing damage, clearing pathways, checking on one another. Several nodded or waved to people across the street. The scene was utterly foreign to Oliver, whose Manhattan neighbors remained faceless entities occupying adjacent luxury spaces. He found his suit from the previous night hanging over a chair, still damp, unwearable. Next to it lay folded clothes, men's jeans, a plain blue t-shirt, and a gray hoodie with faded lettering. A note in neat handwriting read, "My brother left these last visit. Should fit well enough until your designer thread's dry. Coffee's ready downstairs." D. Oliver hesitated. He hadn't worn jeans in years? Decades? Yet his options were limited. Reluctantly, he changed into the borrowed clothes, surprised to find them reasonably comfortable, if unfashionable. The man reflected in the small mirror looked nothing like CEO Oliver Hayes, more like someone ordinary, someone who might actually belong in this neighborhood. Downstairs, morning light revealed Zara's home in greater detail. What had appeared merely modest by candlelight now showed itself as thoughtfully arranged. filled with color and personal touches. Artwork hung on walls, not investment pieces like in his residences, but items clearly selected for personal meaning. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes arranged by preference rather than appearance. Plants thrived in sunny corners. He followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen, where Zara stood at the counter reviewing papers, a red pen in hand. She wore simple linen pants and a green top, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Without makeup, her skin glowed with natural health, a few freckles visible across her nose. "The prodigal CEO awakens," she said without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. "Coffee's in the pot, mugs in the cabinet above." "Power's back," Oliver observed, noting the humming refrigerator and lit ceiling fixture. "For now. They're doing rolling blackouts to manage the grid," Zara replied, finally glancing up. She paused, taking in his transformed appearance. "The clothes fit better than I expected." Oliver shifted uncomfortably under her appraisal. "Thank you for the loan. You look almost human," she said with a small smile. "Less CEO, more actual person." "I am an actual person," Oliver responded, surprisingly stung by the implication. "Are you?" Zara asked, her question lacking malice but carrying weight nonetheless. "Sometimes I think people in your position forget that." Oliver poured himself coffee in a mug decorated with cartoon dinosaurs wearing graduation caps and peered over Zara's shoulder at the paper she was marking. Children's drawings, each depicting what appeared to be a family scene. "Homework?" he asked. "Family portraits," Zara confirmed, "from my kindergartners. They're learning about different types of families and drawing their own." Oliver studied the colorful, disproportionate figures with stick limbs and oversized heads. "You're grading art?" "Not grading, affirming," Zara corrected. "Every child gets positive feedback on their work. I'm writing personalized notes about what I love about their drawings." Oliver picked up one completed assessment. In response to a chaotic scribble that vaguely resembled 3 human figures, Zara had written, "Miguel, I love how you showed your family holding hands. Your use of bright color shows what a happy home you have. Your drawing makes me smile." "This is barely recognizable as people," Oliver observed. Zara looked up sharply. "He's 5 years old, not Picasso." "And that's not the point." "What is the point then?" "Connection, encouragement, making a child feel seen and valued." She set down her pen. "Every note I write tells them I noticed something specific about their work, that I took time to see what they created. For some of these kids, it might be the only personalized positive feedback they receive all day." Oliver had never considered education in these terms. In his world, schools were institutions that prepared children for economic productivity. Success was measured in test scores, college acceptances, and eventual earning potential. Zara's approach seemed inefficient, unmeasurable. Yet she spoke with such conviction that he found himself curious rather than dismissive. "Show me your classroom," he said suddenly. "What?" "You clearly have materials here." He gestured toward a stack of colorful folders on the dining table. "Show me what you do. How you teach." Zara studied him, perhaps searching for mockery, but finding none, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Hayes, let me give you the kindergarten tour. This is our morning meeting chart," Zara explained, spreading a laminated poster across the dining table. "Each day starts with children gathering in a circle. We greet each other by name, share something important from our lives, and set intentions for the day." Oliver examined the cheerful chart with spaces for weather, calendar, and a section labeled, "How are you feeling today?" with cartoon faces displaying various emotions. "Emotional awareness is fundamental to learning," Zara continued, anticipating his question. "Children can't absorb information if they're anxious, hungry, or upset. We acknowledge feelings before we start lessons." She moved to another folder, pulling out carefully designed activity sheets. "These are for centers, small group work where children rotate through different activities. Some are academic, letter recognition, counting. Others focus on fine motor skills or creative expression." As Zara displayed more materials, puppet characters who introduced concepts, songs transcribed with accompanying movements, books categorized by theme, and reading level, Oliver began to grasp the intricate design behind what might appear to casual observers as simple play. "You've created all this yourself?" he asked, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful organization. "Some I've developed, some I've adapted from other teachers, some I've purchased from educators who specialize in certain approaches," Zara explained. "Teaching isn't just presenting information, it's creating environments where discovery happens naturally." Oliver picked up a hand-drawn map of what appeared to be the classroom. This level of detail, it's like designing a complex system. That's exactly what it is, Zara agreed. A system designed for 26 different learning styles, emotional needs, cultural backgrounds, and developmental stages. Each child requires unique pathways to the same destination. For the first time, Oliver considered teaching as something more than glorified babysitting. The strategic thinking, adaptive planning, and personalized execution Zara described would challenge his most talented executives. What about results? He asked, reverting to familiar territory. How do you measure success? Not everything valuable can be quantified, Zara replied. Yes, I track reading levels, mathematical concept mastery, social development. But some of the most important outcomes might not be visible for years. Confidence, curiosity, compassion. Oliver frowned slightly. In his world, unquantifiable outcomes were dismissed as sentimental wishful thinking. Yet Zara spoke of these intangibles with the same certainty he discussed profit margins. You invest tremendous effort for relatively little financial return, he observed. Zara didn't take offense. We measure wealth differently, you and I. Their educational discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Zara excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with an elderly woman carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Oliver, this is Mrs. Chen from next door. Mrs. Chen, this is Oliver, my unexpected guest from the storm. You need food, the woman stated matter-of-factly, placing the basket on the counter. I make too much congee this morning. Good for storm day. That's very kind, but unnecessary, Oliver began. Mrs. Chen waved away his words. Young man, in storm we share. You help Zara clean yard later. It wasn't a request. After the elderly woman departed, Oliver stared at the basket. Does she always feed strangers? We're not strangers, we're neighbors, Zara explained, uncovering the basket to reveal containers of steaming rice porridge and various accompaniments. That's how this community works. During the last big storm, I watched her cats for 3 days. During the summer heat wave, she brought me homemade popsicles every afternoon. We take care of each other. Before Oliver could respond, another knock came at the door. This time, a middle-aged man with work-weathered hands introduced himself as Marco from across the street. Checking who needs help with cleanup, he explained. Got a team going house to house. We'll reach you by afternoon. We can manage, but thanks, Zara replied. Maybe check on the Sullivan family first. They have the new baby. Marco nodded knowingly. Already sent Rosa over with supplies. Little man slept through the whole storm, if you can believe it. As the morning progressed, more neighbors appeared, some offering help, others providing updates on storm damage, a few simply checking that Zara was safe. Each interaction revealed another strand in a complex web of community connections. Each person knew something about the others, who needed medication, whose basement always flooded, which elderly residents might need extra attention. Oliver observed these exchanges with growing fascination. In his high-rise buildings, neighbors actively avoided interaction. Here, connection wasn't just encouraged, it was assumed as the natural state of existence. Is this normal? He finally asked after the fourth visitor departed. This constant involvement? This is community, Zara corrected. People existing in relationship rather than isolation. The concept was so foreign to Oliver's experience that he struggled to categorize it. Was it inefficient? Certainly. Intrusive? Possibly, yet undeniably effective at meeting immediate needs without institutional intervention. For the first time, he wondered if his buildings, designed to maximize privacy and minimize interaction, were missing something essential to human experience. The rain stopped, Zara announced, glancing out the window. Want to see my pride and joy while we have a break in the weather? She led Oliver 3 blocks down the street to what had appeared from his Ferrari the previous night as simply an empty lot. In daylight, it revealed itself as a thriving community garden, rows of vegetables, flowering plants, and herbs arranged in raised beds. Despite the previous night's storm, most plants remained intact, though some were bent under the weight of rainwater. The neighborhood transformed this abandoned lot 8 years ago, Zara explained as they walked the mulched paths between gardens. Each family maintains their own plot, but we share the harvest with anyone who needs it. Oliver noticed the careful organization, irrigation systems designed to conserve water, composting stations, tool-sharing arrangements. Like Zara's teaching materials, what initially appeared simple revealed sophisticated design upon closer inspection. You created this? He asked, watching as she straightened storm-damaged plants with practiced hands. We all did, she corrected. I coordinate the educational programming. We bring students here for science lessons, host community events, teach cooking classes using what we grow. She moved through the garden with natural confidence, identifying plants by both common and scientific names, explaining growing conditions and harvest times. Her knowledge was comprehensive, her passion evident. These tomato varieties are specifically adapted to our climate and soil conditions, she explained, supporting a laden plant with a stake. We save the seeds each year so they become increasingly suited to this exact location. That's surprisingly sophisticated, Oliver admitted. Did you think community gardening was just throwing seeds in dirt? Zara asked with a raised eyebrow. This garden produces over 2,000 pounds of fresh produce annually. We track yields, soil conditions, pollinator populations, and water usage. Most of our participants have become amateur botanists by necessity. Oliver stooped to examine a plant label written in careful script. Cherokee purple, planted 4/15, first harvest expected 7/10. Every bed featured similar documentation, systematic record-keeping that rivaled his corporate protocols. People dismiss projects like this as hobby gardens, Zara continued, but we're addressing food access issues, environmental education, community cohesion, and mental health benefits simultaneously. The return on investment is enormous, though not in the currency you typically value. As they worked side by side, Oliver following Zara's instructions to stake tomato plants and clear storm debris, he found himself reconsidering his definition of productivity. This space, which his developer's eye would have immediately marked for luxury condominiums, instead served multiple functions for hundreds of people across economic barriers. My community garden plot costs $35 annually, Zara said, as if reading his thoughts. It provides approximately $600 worth of organic produce, countless hours of stress relief, and connections with neighbors I would never otherwise know. What investment in your portfolio offers better returns? Oliver had no ready answer. His investments generated millions, but benefited shareholders, not communities. They created wealth that remained largely abstract, numbers and accounts rather than food on tables or relationships between neighbors. As they headed back toward Zara's house, they passed a code playground where children were already returning to swing sets and slides, their laughter cutting through the post-storm quiet. Parents chatted on benches, exchanging storm stories and offers of assistance. This is what community development actually looks like, Zara said quietly. Not tearing things down to build monuments to wealth, but creating spaces where people can truly live, not just exist. The gentle rebuke hit Oliver with unexpected force. For the first time in his career, he found himself viewing his life's work through someone else's eyes, and finding it strangely hollow. Weather alert says another storm system is approaching, Zara announced, checking her phone as they returned to her house. We have about 3 hours before round 2 hits. Oliver glanced at his own useless device. I need to contact my office. Is there anywhere with reliable cell service? The community center 2 blocks over has a generator and satellite connection, Zara replied. But they'll be busy coordinating neighborhood response teams. Everyone's pitching in before the next wave. Response teams? Oliver questioned. For vulnerable residents, flood-prone areas, emergency supplies, Zara explained, pulling on a pair of work gloves. Marco's coordinating cleanup crews. Mrs. Chen is organizing a community kitchen, and I'm on the sandbagging team. Sandbagging, Oliver repeated flatly. Yes, Mr. CEO, sandbagging. The elementary school basement flooded last night. We need to protect it before the next downpour. She tossed him a pair of worn work gloves. Consider it payment for room and board. Oliver stared at the gloves as if they were alien artifacts. I don't do manual labor. Today you do, Zara replied simply, unless you'd prefer to sit alone in a powerless house while everyone else works to save their neighborhood. The challenge in her eyes was unmistakable. Oliver Hayes had faced down hostile takeovers, outmaneuvered corporate rivals, and intimidated countless opponents across negotiating tables. Yet something about Zara's quiet expectation made refusal impossible. Fine, he conceded, reluctantly taking the gloves. But I need to contact my office first. 20 minutes at the community center, Zara agreed. Then you're filling sandbags until your fancy hands blister. The Willow Avenue Community Center hummed with focused activity. What had once been a church basement now served as command central for the neighborhood's storm response. Folding tables had been arranged in functional stations, one for matching volunteers with tasks, another distributing emergency supplies, a third providing hot food and coffee. Most surprising to Oliver was the complete absence of official personnel. No emergency services, no government representatives, just residents organizing themselves with remarkable efficiency. Zara, thank goodness, called a gray-haired woman managing the volunteer table. "We need your kindergarten magic. The Sullivan children are getting restless in the childcare corner." "On it, Eleanor," Zara responded. "But first, my guest needs the satellite phone. Oliver, this is Eleanor Martinez, retired emergency room nurse and our unofficial neighborhood mayor. Eleanor, meet Oliver Hayes." The older woman assessed Oliver with sharp eyes. Another stray from the storm. Zara's always collecting something. Plants, books, people. "Mr. Hayes is a CEO," Zara explained with subtle emphasis. "His car broke down near my house during the worst of it." "CEO, hmm?" Eleanor's expression remained unimpressed. "Well, CEO hands can fill sandbags just like the rest of us. Satellite phones in the office. 5 minutes max. Others need it too." As Zara left to assist with childcare, Oliver found himself directed to a small office where a satellite phone sat on a desk. His call to the office was brief and unsatisfying. His executive assistant reported that the Chinese investors had already departed, unwilling to wait out the storm. Months of negotiation potentially wasted because of weather. Strangely, Oliver found himself less concerned than expected. The crisis that would normally consume him seemed distant compared to the immediate activity surrounding him, people addressing tangible problems with direct action. When he emerged from the office, Eleanor immediately handed him a reflective vest. "You're with Marco's team on Maple Street. They need strong backs." "I haven't agreed to," Oliver began. "Young man," Eleanor interrupted, "everyone works today. That's how communities survive." Marco's cleanup crew consisted of 8 neighbors clearing debris from storm drains to prevent additional flooding. Oliver stood awkwardly at the periphery until Marco thrust a rake into his hands. "New guy, good timing. Take this section," the man instructed, pointing to a clogged drain. "Clear everything 5 feet in each direction." Oliver examined the rake with thinly disguised contempt. The only garden tool he'd ever operated was a golf club, and that came with a caddy. "Problem?" asked a young woman working nearby, noting his hesitation. "I'm not exactly dressed for this," Oliver replied, gesturing to his borrowed clothes. The woman, barely 20, with purple-streaked hair and multiple piercings, laughed. "None of us are dressed for natural disasters. That's kind of the point." Properly chastened, Oliver awkwardly began raking debris from the drain. His technique was immediately, obviously flawed, his grip too rigid, his movements inefficient. Marco approached after watching his struggles. "Not like that," the man said, demonstrating a more effective motion. "Long, smooth strokes. Let the rake do the work." Oliver adjusted his approach, frustrated by his incompetence at such a basic task. In his world, expertise was assumed, weakness never displayed. Here, his inability was met not with judgment, but matter-of-fact correction. "You've really never done this before," Marco observed, watching Oliver's improved but still awkward efforts. "I have people who handle maintenance," Oliver admitted. "Must be nice," Marco replied without resentment. "I handle maintenance for 30 buildings, but I can't afford to hire someone for my own place." "You're a maintenance worker?" Oliver asked, continuing to rake. "Maintenance supervisor for the hospital system," Marco corrected. 23 years keeping facilities running so doctors can save lives. Not glamorous, but necessary. Oliver thought about the hospitals his company owned, buildings he'd never visited, maintained by people he'd never considered. People like Marco, whose work enabled the entire healthcare system to function. "The drain's clear," Oliver announced after 10 minutes of surprisingly taxing effort. "Good. 5 more to go," Marco replied, pointing down the street. "Welcome to the glamorous world of disaster response." 3 hours later, Oliver's borrowed clothes were soaked with sweat, his uncalloused hands developing blisters despite the gloves. He'd cleared drains, moved fallen branches, and was now part of a human chain passing sandbags to protect the elementary school's vulnerable entrance. "Physics major, next bag," called the woman organizing the line, referring to people by identifying characteristics rather than names. When the sandbag reached Oliver, she nodded. "CEO, keep it moving." The bag, weighing nearly 40 pounds, passed from Oliver's hands to nurse with the blue hair next in line. The system was remarkably efficient, with each person assuming the role that matched their capacity. Elderly participants directed traffic or distributed water. Teenagers ran messages between teams. Everyone contributed according to ability. As they worked, conversation flowed naturally. Updates on neighbors, storm damage reports, offers of specific assistance. Oliver listened, fascinated by the information exchange. In 1 hour, he learned more about this community than he knew about his own luxury building after 5 years of residence. My basement apartment flooded completely, reported a young teacher in the sandbag line. Lost everything. Instead of empty sympathies, the response was immediate and practical. Stay with us until you find a new place, offered an older couple. We've got the spare room since Michael left for college. I have extra furniture and storage, added another neighbor. Nothing fancy, but clean and functional. My cousin manages apartments in Riverside, said someone else. I'll call her tonight about vacancies. Within minutes, the crisis had been addressed through a network of connections and tangible assistance. No bureaucracy, no paperwork, no delay, just human beings responding directly to another's need. Oliver thought about how his own company handled crisis. Attorneys would be consulted, insurance claims filed, responsibility assigned. Weeks or months might pass before action occurred. The contrast was stark and unexpectedly humbling. CEO, water break, called Zara, appearing with bottles of water for the sandbag team. She surveyed Oliver's disheveled state with undisguised amusement. Look at you, actual sweat on the actual brow. Does your board of directors know you're capable of physical labor? Very funny, Oliver replied, accepting the water gratefully. Despite his exhaustion and discomfort, he felt a strange satisfaction in the visible progress they'd made. The cleared street, the protected school entrance, the tangible results of collective effort. Admit it, Zara pressed. There's something fulfilling about this kind of work. It's inefficient, Oliver countered automatically. A properly funded municipal response with appropriate equipment could accomplish this in half the time. Perhaps, Zara acknowledged, but we'd lose everything else happening here. Which is, look around, she instructed. Really look. Oliver observed the scene with new attention. Beyond the physical work, he saw other dynamics at play. The elderly residents sharing homemade sandwiches, teenagers helping children create chalk art on undamaged sidewalks, neighbors exchanging information about available resources. What had initially appeared chaotic now revealed itself as a complex system of mutual support. People are connecting, he said slowly, recognizing the pattern. Building relationships while addressing problems. Exactly, Zara nodded. The work is important, but the community forming through the work matters more. That's what you can't outsource or make more efficient. A volunteer coordinator called for the final push of sandbags before the approaching storm. As Oliver rejoined the line, he found himself working alongside a hospital janitor, a retired professor, a high school student, and a local shop owner, all functioning as equals in this moment of shared purpose. For a man whose entire existence was predicated on hierarchy, status, and competition, this flat organization of mutual aid represented an entirely foreign value system. Yet he couldn't deny its effectiveness, not just in addressing the immediate crisis, but in creating something less tangible but equally essential, a sense of belonging. As the sky darkened with approaching rain, Oliver Hayes, his hands blistered, his borrowed clothes filthy, his normal defenses lowered by exhaustion, experienced something he hadn't felt since childhood, the simple satisfaction of being needed, of contributing directly to others' welfare without expectation of profit or advantage. It was inefficient, uncomfortable, and entirely at odds with his carefully constructed life. It was also, he reluctantly admitted to himself, somehow more fulfilling than anything he'd experienced in years of corporate conquest. The revelation was as unwelcome as it was profound. The second storm arrived with less fury but greater persistence than the first. Rain drummed steadily against the windows of Zara's home as night descended once again. The neighborhood's collective efforts had strengthened defenses, drains cleared, vulnerable areas sandbagged, supplies distributed. Now there was nothing to do but wait. Oliver sat on Zara's porch swing, watching raindrops illuminate briefly in the porch light before disappearing into gathering puddles. His body ached from unaccustomed physical labor, hands tender with developing blisters. The borrowed clothes clung to him, still damp with sweat despite the shower he'd taken. As he rocked gently, an unexpected memory surfaced. His father's small construction company when Oliver was a child, before the empire, before the wealth. He recalled visiting job sites, watching his father work alongside his crew, everyone's hands equally calloused, everyone's clothes equally soiled. You have to know the work before you can lead the workers, his father had said, placing a small hammer in 10-year-old Oliver's hand. Start with the foundation. Everything depends on what you can't see. The memory was so vivid he could almost smell the sawdust and concrete. When had that changed? When had his father transformed from craftsman to conqueror? When had building things that last become acquiring things that appreciate? Another memory emerged, helping his mother plant tomatoes in their modest backyard garden. His small hands pressing seeds into soil, her patient explanation of how to water properly, his delight when green shoots first appeared. The miracle is in the waiting, she'd told him. Most valuable things can't be rushed. Oliver couldn't remember the last time he'd waited for anything. In his current life, desires were fulfilled immediately, obstacles removed efficiently, gratification never delayed. Yet here he sat, powerless against rain, dependent on a kindergarten teacher's hospitality, his massive corporate machinery completely irrelevant. And strangest of all, he didn't mind. Tea? Zara's voice broke through his reflections as she stepped onto the porch, offering a steaming mug. Oliver accepted gratefully, the warmth welcome against the cooling evening air. "Thank you for today," he said, surprising himself with a sincerity in his voice. "For putting you to work?" Zara asked with amusement, settling beside him on the swing. "For showing me something different," he clarified. "Your community functions in ways I'd forgotten existed." Zara sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Most people never experience true community anymore. We've designed it out of our lives, privacy walls, digital isolation, services that eliminate interaction. We've optimized for convenience rather than connection." "Convenience is valuable," Oliver countered, though with less conviction than usual. "Is it? At what cost?" Zara challenged gently. "Look at today. Inconvenience brought this neighborhood together. Difficulty created bonds. Shared problems generated shared solutions." The insight struck Oliver with unexpected force. His entire business model was predicated on eliminating inconvenience, on creating luxurious isolation. Hayes Enterprises built residences where inhabitants never needed to interact, where digital systems anticipated needs before they arose, where human contact was an option rather than a necessity. "My father started as a builder," Oliver said suddenly. "Actual construction. He knew every person on his crews by name." Zara nodded, allowing him the space to continue. "He changed when the company grew, became focused on expansion rather than creation. I followed his example." Oliver stared into his tea. "I can't remember the last time I knew the names of the people working on my projects." "It's never to them," Zara offered simply. "Rocked in. Silence. Listening. Rhythm of the rain. For the first time in felt no. Fill the quiet with plans or decisions. Moment. Why teaching?" "Oliver, you're clearly intelligent. You fields." Zara considered the question seriously. "I believe early education is the foundation of everything. Get it right, and you create adults who think critically, connect meaningfully, contribute purposefully. Get it wrong, and you create people like me." Suggested. "Self-awareness, going to say, from what matters. But if the shoe fits." Her gentle teasing lacked the sharp edge Oliver was accustomed to in his corporate world, where masked aggression, self-reflection, fulfillment? He asked, genuinely curious. Besides teaching, toward neighborhood beyond her porch, being rooted somewhere real, knowing my neighbors' stories, growing things, making spaces better than I found them, contributing more than I consume. Her answer belied its profound challenge to. He consumed. He, resources, more space, more energy, his multiple homes, mostly, his possessions gathered dust. In climate, diminished. Enough. He pressed. Enough is an interesting concept, replied. Lost, of, replaced. It with more, but more is. Oliver thought about his endless acquisitions, companies, properties, possessions, each providing momentary satisfaction before the hunger for the next conquest emerged. When had anything ever been enough? Quietly, and enough. Zara's expression softened with, perhaps you've been measuring wealth by friends, the story you're witnessing throughout our lives. Moment. We question everything we thought we knew about success and yourself. This, where the been walking suddenly, doesn't lead where it would. If Oliver's journey is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button right now. Mr. Ross, connection, life's most valuable, often come when we expect a storm. Subscribe and hit that you don't miss what next in Unexpected Encounter. Now, let's return to that porch swing where two strangers from different worlds are discovering they might have more to learn from each other than either could have imagined. The rain continued its steady rhythm as Oliver and Zara sat in contemplative silence. For a man who measured each minute by its productive value, this quiet moment of reflection should have felt wasteful. Instead, it offered something his structured existence rarely permitted, the space to question his fundamental assumptions about what constituted a life well lived. The woman beside him, a kindergarten teacher with a fraction of his resources, seemed to possess a wealth he couldn't quantify. Her modest home contained more warmth than his multiple residences. Her community connections provided more security than his investment portfolio. Her purposeful work generated more satisfaction than his corporate conquests. Oliver Hayes, master of acquisition, found himself confronting an uncomfortable truth. He had built an empire of properties while neglecting to build a life worth inhabiting. The storm's passing, Zara observed, nodding toward the lightning rain. Roads should be clear by morning. The prospect of returning to his normal existence, which yesterday would have brought relief, now triggered an unexpected sensation of loss. Something significant was happening in this humble house on this ordinary street, something Oliver wasn't ready to abandon. I should check on my car, he said, though both knew it was an excuse to remain a little longer in Zara's world. She nodded, understanding the unspoken request. First light. We'll see what can be salvaged. Morning arrived with surprising clarity after 2 days of storms. Sunlight streamed through Zara's kitchen windows as Oliver sipped coffee, studying a neighborhood map she'd drawn to help him locate a mechanic. Pete's Auto Shop is your best bet, Zara explained, circling a location 3 blocks away. He's reasonable and won't charge extra just because your car costs more than his house. Oliver folded the map carefully. I appreciate your hospitality. Not many people would take in a stranded stranger during a crisis. That's exactly when people need help most, Zara replied simply, gathering items into her tote bag. I need to check on my classroom today. The school was taking on water when we sandbagged it yesterday. I could come with you, Oliver offered, surprising himself. Help with cleanup. Zara paused, studying him with curious amusement. 2 days ago you were a CEO who didn't do manual labor. Now you're volunteering for more? Consider it continued payment for room and board, Oliver replied with a hint of a smile. Besides, I should see if my corporate responsibility initiatives could support local schools. It wasn't entirely a lie. The Hayes Foundation did maintain an educational giving program, though it typically favored elite institutions that offered naming opportunities and strategic connections. Elementary schools in middle-class neighborhoods rarely made the list. My classroom first, then your car, Zara agreed. I need to grab my volunteer schedule from my desk anyway. Today's normally my hospital day. Hospital day? I volunteer at St. Mary's Children's Hospital on Thursdays, she explained, checking her watch. Reading program for long-term pediatric patients. Though I doubt they're running normal programs after the flooding. Oliver froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips. St. Mary's, he repeated, the name hitting him like a physical blow. The Children's Hospital downtown, Zara clarified, misinterpreting his reaction. I've been volunteering there for 5 years. The kids are amazing, resilient despite everything they're facing. Oliver set down his mug carefully, struggling to maintain his neutral expression. St. Mary's Children's Hospital. The property his company was actively working to shut down. The building scheduled for demolition within months, the obstacle to his $300 million development. Sounds rewarding, he managed, voice tight. It puts everything in perspective, Zara continued, unaware of his internal earthquake. Those kids facing life-threatening illnesses with such courage makes our everyday problems seem trivial in comparison. Every word drove the knife deeper. Oliver reached for his phone, still useless without service, more as a distraction than anything else. He needed to process this collision of worlds, needed to recalibrate before Zara somehow discovered who he really was and what he was planning to destroy. The elementary school had suffered minimal damage thanks to the neighborhood's sandbagging efforts. Zara's classroom, a colorful space filled with learning centers, reading nooks, and student artwork, required only minor cleanup. Oliver found himself automatically assisting, mopping water from a small leak near the windows while Zara reorganized displaced materials. The reading corner took the worst of it. She sighed, examining damp cushions. These will need to be replaced before the children return. I could, Oliver began, then caught himself. Throwing money at the problem felt suddenly inappropriate. I could help find replacements, he amended. Zara smiled at his offer. Thanks. These kids deserve a comfortable space to discover books. As she rummaged through her desk for her volunteer schedule, Oliver noticed a framed photograph he'd missed during their earlier visit. It showed Zara surrounded by children in hospital gowns, all wearing paper crowns and bright smiles. Behind them stood the distinctive blue and white logo of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the same logo that appeared on countless documents in his office, marked for acquisition and demolition. His stomach tightened. These weren't abstract obstacles to development anymore. They were real children with names and faces and life-threatening conditions. Children Zara clearly cared about deeply. Found it, she announced, holding up her volunteer schedule. Looks like they've canceled regular programming through next week due to storm cleanup. That's disappointing. The kids really look forward to visitors. Oliver barely heard her, his attention fixed on the photograph. Each smiling face represented a child who would be displaced by his development plans. Each paper crown adorned a head that would need to be relocated to accommodate luxury condominiums. Each bed occupied valuable square footage that his company had calculated would generate significantly higher returns as high-end real estate. Oliver, everything okay? Zara asked, noticing his distraction. Fine, he replied automatically. Just thinking about your volunteer work. Impressive commitment. Zara shrugged as if her dedication were unremarkable. The oncology ward can be difficult emotionally, but the children are incredible. They're fighting battles most adults couldn't handle, yet they still find joy in small things. A good story, a silly crown, a visitor who remembers their name. Each detail landed like an accusation. Oliver Hayes, who prided himself on strategic thinking, found himself utterly unprepared for this collision between abstract business decisions and concrete human consequences. They walked to Pete's auto shop in silence, Oliver lost in mounting internal conflict. The mechanic confirmed what he already suspected. The Ferrari's electrical system had been compromised by floodwater. Repairs would take days, if parts could be located at all. I can have it towed to the dealer in Manhattan, Oliver said, arranging for a flatbed with one of the few functioning phones in the neighborhood. I'll need a car service back to the city. Leaving so soon? Zara asked as they walked away from the shop. Something in her tone suggested disappointment, though Oliver might have imagined it. I have responsibilities, he replied vaguely. Meetings, decisions. The hospital demolition won't wait, I suppose, Zara said casually. Oliver stopped walking. What? St. Mary's, Zara clarified, her expression unreadable. The children's hospital your company is trying to shut down for luxury condominiums. The world seemed to tilt beneath Oliver's feet. How did you know who you are? Zara finished. I recognized you yesterday morning, Oliver Hayes. Your face has been on protest signs outside the hospital for months. The revelation hit him with stunning force. She'd known all along. His identity, his company's plans, the fundamental conflict between their values. Yet she'd sheltered him, fed him, integrated him into her community without hesitation. You knew, and you still took me in? He asked, genuinely bewildered. People deserve kindness regardless of their actions, Zara replied simply. Though I'll admit, I was curious what kind of man tries to destroy a children's hospital for profit. The directness of her statement, without anger or accusation, just calm assessment, struck deeper than any emotional outburst could have. Oliver had faced protesters, negative press, political opposition, all expected consequences of aggressive development. But no one had ever made him confront the human impact of his decisions so directly, so personally. It's not that simple, he began, falling back on practiced corporate defenses. The property is underutilized. The hospital is inefficient. Our development will generate tax revenue that could fund healthcare in more appropriate locations. Even to his own ears, the justification sounded hollow. Let me show you something, Zara said, changing direction toward a small park. They sat on a bench overlooking a code playground, where a few children were already returning to swing sets and slides, their resilience evident in laughter that pierced the post-storm quiet. See the little girl in the purple jacket? Zara pointed discreetly toward a child of perhaps 7, carefully making her way up a ladder. That's Lily. She completed chemotherapy at St. Mary's 3 months ago. Brain tumor. The doctors at St. Mary's saved her life with an experimental treatment program. Oliver watched the child's determined climb, her movements slightly uncoordinated, but her face set with concentration. The boy on the swing is Marcus, Zara continued. Congenital heart defect. 3 surgeries at St. Mary's before he turned 5. His family lives 6 blocks from here. They can visit him daily because the hospital is accessible by public transportation. With each child identified, each medical history explained, each family situation detailed, the abstract obstacle to development transformed into individual human stories. Children with names, parents with hopes, medical teams with expertise, lives interconnected in ways Oliver's financial projections had never calculated. This isn't fair, he said quietly. What isn't? Zara asked. Personalizing it this way, Oliver replied. Business decisions can't be made on emotional grounds. Why not? Zara challenged. If business decisions affect actual people, why shouldn't those people's stories matter? What's the purpose of business if not to serve human needs? The question penetrated Oliver's professional armor. Throughout his career, he'd maintained careful separation between business strategy and human impact. Properties were assets, not communities. Buildings were investments, not homes. Demolitions were progress, not disruption. Now, watching children whose lives had been saved by a hospital he planned to destroy, that separation became impossible to maintain. There are other hospital options, Oliver said, though with diminishing conviction, other locations that make more economic sense. For whom? Zara pressed. Not for Lily's family, who can barely afford their mortgage, let alone transportation to a distant facility. Not for Marcus's mother, a single parent who visits him during her lunch break because the hospital is near her workplace. She turned to face him directly, her expression not angry but intensely serious. The economic sense. You're talking about benefits wealthy investors, not vulnerable children. Your development would generate luxury housing for people who already have multiple options, while eliminating essential care for those with none. Oliver had no ready counterargument. His usual talking points about economic growth, job creation, and urban renewal felt suddenly inadequate against the concrete reality of children's lives. Why did you shelter me? He asked, genuinely puzzled by her kindness in the face of their fundamental opposition. Knowing who I am, what my company plans? Zara considered the question carefully, partly because it was the right thing to do, partly because I believe people can change when they see the consequences of their actions, and partly because I wanted you to understand what you're really destroying. And what's that? Oliver asked quietly. Not just a building, Zara replied. A community, a lifeline, a place where children find hope when everything else has failed them. She paused, watching the children play. Your development would replace a healing space with luxury that nobody needs. Is that really the legacy you want? The question penetrated deeper than any corporate challenge Oliver had ever faced. It wasn't about market share or profit margins or shareholder value. It was about the fundamental purpose of his life's work, and for the first time, he found himself unable to defend that purpose, even to himself. I need to make some calls, he said finally, rising from the bench. I imagine you do, Zara agreed. The community center still has satellite connection. As they walked in silence toward the center, Oliver Hayes, master dealmaker, corporate strategist, wealthy beyond measure, faced the most significant negotiation of his career, reconciling the man he had been with the man he might become, the values he had championed with the truths he could no longer deny. And for once, he had no idea how this particular deal would end. Oliver lay awake in Zara's guest room, moonlight casting unfamiliar shadows across the ceiling. Sleep remained elusive, his mind replaying the day's revelations in excruciating detail. The children on the code playground, the photographs in Zara's classroom, the hospital his company planned to demolish. For 20 years, he'd evaluated properties solely by potential return on investment. Buildings weren't communities, they were assets. Neighborhoods weren't ecosystems, they were markets. People weren't individuals with stories, they were demographics with purchasing power. This clinical approach had built his fortune and defined his success. It had also, he now realized, insulated him from the human consequences of his decisions. Oliver turned restlessly. The modest twin bed, nothing like his custom-made mattress that adjusted to his preferred firmness with the touch of a button. Yet his discomfort stemmed not from physical circumstances, but from the uncomfortable truths he could no longer avoid. What would happen to Lily if St. Mary's closed? Where would Marcus receive his specialized care? How many families would lose their lifeline to medical treatment? Questions he'd never before considered now demanded answers. He recalled his father's voice from decades earlier. "Remember, Oliver, we're not just building structures, we're creating spaces where lives unfold. That's a responsibility, not just an opportunity." When had he forgotten that lesson? When had profit margin superseded purpose? When had he started measuring success by acquisition rather than contribution? Dawn's first light found Oliver Hayes, master of Manhattan real estate, conqueror of corporate rivals, confronting the most formidable opponent of his career, the man he had become. "Mr. Hayes, thank goodness." His executive assistant's voice carried clear relief through the satellite phone. "We've been trying to reach you for days. The Chinese delegation has threatened to pull out completely if we don't—" "Miranda there?" Oliver interrupted, standing in the community center's small office. "Yes, but—" "Getter and Porter. Conference call, now." 5 minutes later, his chief counsel and CFO joined the call, their voices crisp with professional concern disguised as personal worry. "Oliver, are you all right?" Miranda asked. "We've been—" "The St. Mary's project," he interrupted again. "What's our timeline?" James Porter answered immediately. "Health inspector visit scheduled for Monday. Building should be empty by end of month. Demolition contracts ready for your signature when you return." "Cancel it," Oliver said. Silence followed, so profound he could almost hear their blinking confusion. "Cancel the signature meeting?" Miranda clarified cautiously. "All of it. The inspection, the demolition contracts. Put the entire project on hold." "Oliver," Porter's voice shifted to careful rationality, "the Chinese consortium has already committed $180 million. Backing out now would—" "I'm not backing out," Oliver corrected. "I'm reconsidering our approach." "What approach?" Miranda asked. "We've exhausted every legal avenue. The only path forward is to expedite the building's closure through regulatory pressure." "That building is currently treating children with cancer," Oliver replied, his voice hardening. "Children from working families who can't access care elsewhere." The silence that followed contained volumes of unspoken confusion. Oliver Hayes defending a financially underperforming property, prioritizing social impact over shareholder value. It violated every principle he'd established for Hayes Enterprises. "Have you been injured?" Miranda asked carefully. "Are you under duress?" Oliver almost laughed. "I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years. Find alternative solutions. Explore renovating rather than demolishing. Consider incorporating the hospital into the new development." "That would reduce projected returns by 60% minimum," Porter objected. "Then we'll find investors who care about more than maximum returns," Oliver replied. Meeting adjourned. "I'll be back tomorrow." He hung up before they could respond, knowing his executive team was likely already discussing contingency plans for his apparent mental breakdown. Let them worry. For the first time in decades, Oliver Hayes was questioning whether he'd been measuring success by the right metrics all along. Oliver's return to Zara's neighborhood revealed damage he hadn't fully registered before. A code playground fence collapsed under a fallen tree. An elderly couple struggling to remove debris from their yard. The community center's roof sporting a blue tarp where shingles had blown away. He paused at each site, seeing opportunities not for development, but for restoration, improvement rather than replacement. At the code playground, he joined two fathers attempting to reset the fence posts, offering not just his hands but his knowledge of proper structural support. Together, they secured the barrier that kept young children from wandering toward the street. Passing the elderly couple's home, he stopped without hesitation. "Need another pair of hands?" The woman, Mrs. Chen's sister, he learned, studied him curiously. "You're Zara's storm guest." "Oliver," he confirmed, already gathering fallen branches. "Let me help with the heavy lifting." An hour later, their yard was clear, and Oliver had learned their story. 47 years in the same house, 3 children who'd attended the school where Zara taught, a grandson currently receiving treatment at St. Mary's for juvenile diabetes. Each connection formed a thread in an increasingly complex tapestry, lives intertwined through community institutions his corporate strategies typically dismantled rather than strengthened. At the community center, Oliver approached Eleanor, the unofficial neighborhood mayor. "Your roof needs professional repair before the next rainfall." "Tell me something I don't know," she replied dryly. "We've got estimates, but the budget's tight after emergency supplies." Oliver pulled out his personal checkbook, not the corporate account, and wrote a sum that made Eleanor's eyebrows rise dramatically. "This is anonymous," Oliver finished for her. "Just make sure it's fixed properly. These buildings matter." The words surprised him as much as Eleanor. These buildings matter, not for their market value or development potential, but for their function in sustaining community. Was this what his father had understood before ambition transformed him into something harder, more calculating? Was this the lesson Oliver had missed while building his empire of luxury properties that stood mostly empty while housing crises intensified? Each small action, helping neighbors, supporting community spaces, seeing value beyond financial metrics, felt like rediscovering muscles long atrophied from disuse. Uncomfortable, unfamiliar, yet somehow right. Zara found him at the community garden, repairing irrigation lines damaged during the storm. She watched silently for several minutes as he worked with surprising competence, following the system design he'd studied earlier. Becoming quite the handyman, she observed finally. Oliver glanced up, unable to read her expression. Basic problem solving. The principles aren't that different from development projects, just the scale and purpose. Purpose matters, Zara replied, kneeling beside him to examine his work. Though I'll admit, I'm curious about your sudden enthusiasm for community service. Her skepticism was justified. People didn't transform overnight, especially those with decades invested in contrary values. Oliver respected her caution. It showed judgment he'd failed to exercise throughout his career. I called my office, he said, focusing on connecting 2 sections of tubing. Put the St. Mary's project on hold. Zara's hands stilled. Temporarily? Indefinitely, Oliver clarified. I've directed my team to explore alternatives that preserve the hospital. Why? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. Oliver considered his response carefully. Because you were right. I've been measuring wealth and success by flawed metrics, creating luxury for the few while ignoring essentials for the many. And this revelation came to you after 1 storm and 2 days in a middle-class neighborhood. Zara's skepticism remained evident, though tempered with curiosity. The seeds were already there, Oliver admitted. Doubts I'd been suppressing, questions about what I was actually building with my life. The storm just washed away my usual defenses. Zara studied him intently, searching for insincerity. People make storm promises all the time, Oliver. Grand declarations during crisis that evaporate once normalcy returns. This isn't a promise, he replied. It's a recognition. I've been successful by conventional standards while failing at the things that actually matter. Something in his tone must have conveyed authenticity, because Zara's expression softened slightly. Recognition is just the first step. The harder part is changing direction after traveling the same path for decades. I know, Oliver acknowledged. And I don't expect you to believe in my transformation based on words alone. Actions matter more. Yes, Zara agreed simply. They do. The cautious trust in her eyes, not quite belief but willingness to observe without judgment, felt more valuable than any corporate acquisition he'd ever negotiated. Evening found them walking through the recovering neighborhood, the sunset painting damaged structures and forgiving golden light. Oliver had spent the day immersed in community recovery efforts, not directing from a distance as he would have previously, but participating directly, learning residents' names, hearing their stories. Your car's been towed to the dealer, Zara informed him, as they passed the spot where his Ferrari had died. The service should be here within the hour to take you back to Manhattan. Oliver nodded, feeling strangely reluctant about returning to his penthouse, a space designed for isolation rather than connection, for displaying wealth rather than creating comfort. Thank you, he said, meaning far more than the arrangement of transportation. For everything. You're welcome, Zara replied simply, though I'm still not entirely sure what happened here. Neither am I, Oliver admitted, but something did. They paused at a small bakery reopening after the storm, its owners sweeping debris from the entrance. Oliver had learned during the day that the woman had provided free bread throughout the crisis, despite damage to her own business. Miss Abramowitz, he greeted her by name, a small but significant change from his previous anonymizing of service providers. Reopening already. People need to eat, she replied, pragmatically. Storm or no storm. Oliver made a purchase, his first direct retail transaction in years without an assistant or concierge as intermediary. And they continued walking, sharing the fresh bread between them. I've been thinking about what you said, Oliver ventured after several blocks of comfortable silence. About measuring wealth differently. And? Zara prompted. I'm worth billions on paper, he said slowly. But these past days have been the first time in years I've felt genuinely useful. There's something wrong with that equation. It's never too late to recalculate, Zara offered, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. As they approached her home, the modest structure that had sheltered him physically while challenging him intellectually, Oliver made a decision. "The car service can wait until morning," he said, "if your guest room is still available." The request wasn't about avoiding his return to reality. It was about embracing this new reality a little longer, learning its lessons more thoroughly before attempting to integrate them into his former life. Zara studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to assess his intentions rather than his words. "One more night," she agreed finally. "Though I should warn you, I'm making vegetable stew, and you'll be expected to chop onions." The mundane domestic task, something his chef would normally handle without his awareness, suddenly felt like a privilege rather than an imposition. "I'd be honored," Oliver replied, meaning it completely. As they entered Zara's home, now familiar in ways his own residences had never been, Oliver Hayes understood that the true transformation hadn't even begun. These were merely the first steps on a journey that would either remake him entirely or reveal him as incapable of genuine change. Either way, he was finally asking the right questions about what constituted a life worth building. Morning sunlight streamed through Zara's kitchen windows, illuminating the domestic scene unfolding within. Oliver, billionaire CEO, master of corporate acquisitions, stood at the counter in borrowed clothes, carefully slicing fruit for breakfast while Zara prepared coffee. The storm had finally passed overnight, leaving a transformed landscape outside and a subtly altered dynamic between them. "You're getting better with a knife," Zara observed, watching his methodical technique. "Less surgeon, more actual human preparing food." "I had an excellent teacher," Oliver replied, the compliment offered without calculation, a novelty for a man who typically measured words for strategic advantage. They moved around each other with an ease that belied their brief acquaintance, a synchronicity that emerged from shared meals and common purpose. Oliver found himself noticing details he would have previously overlooked, the way sunlight caught the golden highlights in Zara's hair, how her smile created small creases at the corners of her eyes, the gentle confidence in her movements. "Roads are clearing," Zara commented, glancing out the window. "Your car service could probably get through now." "Probably," Oliver agreed, making no move toward his phone. "Though there's still cleanup to be done here." The delay was deliberate, though he couldn't fully articulate why. Something about this simple kitchen with its mismatched plates and children's artwork magnets felt more genuine than the designer perfection of his penthouse. Something about Zara's presence made him reluctant to return to his carefully controlled existence. "The community garden needs attention," Zara suggested, recognizing his unspoken desire to stay. "Many hands make light work, as Mrs. Chin would say." "I'd like that," Oliver replied, surprising himself with his eagerness for another day of manual labor, something he'd spent decades paying others to handle. As they sat down to breakfast, fresh fruit, whole-grain toast, coffee, and chipped mugs, Oliver realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a home-cooked meal with someone else. His carefully scheduled life had eliminated such ordinary pleasures in pursuit of efficiency and achievement. The recognition sent a wave of loneliness through him, not a new condition but newly acknowledged. Across the table, Zara's warm presence offered a glimpse of what he'd been missing. The community garden hummed with activity as neighbors worked to restore storm-damaged plots. Oliver and Zara joined a team rebuilding collapsed trellises for climbing vegetables. Working side by side, their conversation flowed with increasing ease. "Why real estate?" Zara asked, holding a wooden frame steady while Oliver secured its joints. Of all the ways to build wealth, why buildings? The question caught him off guard, not the inquiry itself, but the realization that no one had asked about his motivations in years. People asked about strategies, acquisitions, profits, never the underlying purpose. "My father built homes before he built empires," Oliver replied, surprisingly willing to share personal history he typically kept private. "I grew up visiting construction sites, watching structures rise from empty lots. There was something substantial about creation. But you moved from building to acquiring," Zara observed without judgment. Oliver paused, considering this truth. Somewhere along the way, the mission changed. My father's company shifted from creating spaces to controlling them. I followed that path without questioning it. "And now?" Zara asked, her eyes meeting his with genuine interest. "Now I'm not sure what I'm building anymore," he admitted, the vulnerability unfamiliar but somehow right in this setting, with this woman, or why. Their hands brushed as they positioned the next trellis, the brief contact sending an unexpected current between them. Neither acknowledged it verbally, but their movements became more conscious, more attuned to each other's presence. "What about you?" Oliver asked. "Teaching wasn't your first career, was it?" Zara smiled, surprised by his perception. Corporate marketing, actually. 6 figures, expense account, the works. What happened? Oliver asked, genuinely curious about the path that led from corporate success to kindergarten classroom. I was creating demand for things nobody needed, she explained, securing vines to the rebuilt structure with gentle hands. One day I realized I was using my talents to make people feel inadequate so they'd buy more stuff. I wanted to build something better than insecurity and consumption. Her answer resonated uncomfortably with Oliver's growing doubts about his own career. The parallels between them, both having walked away from lucrative paths for different reasons, created another thread of connection. You chose well, he said quietly. What you build lasts longer than any structure. The sincerity in his voice surprised them both. Afternoon found them helping an elderly neighbor sort through water-damaged photographs, carefully separating images that could be saved from those beyond recovery. The intimate task, handling another's memories, witnessing their history, created a bubble of shared purpose that felt oddly significant. My mother kept albums like these, Oliver commented, carefully placing a salvageable wedding photo on the drying rack they'd improvised. I have no idea where they ended up after she died. Probably in storage somewhere. The admission revealed more than he'd intended. Not just the loss of his mother, but his disconnection from his own history, the careless handling of what should have been precious. Zara's expression softened. When did you lose her? 12 years ago, Oliver replied, the pain surprisingly fresh despite the passage of time. Cancer. It was quick. I'm sorry, Zara said simply, her hand covering his briefly in a gesture of genuine compassion. Oliver nodded, unable to articulate the complex grief he'd never properly processed, how his mother's death had coincided with his company, his most aggressive expansion, how he'd buried himself in acquisitions rather than emotions, how success had become both distraction and tribute. She would have liked you, he said suddenly, the truth of it striking him with unexpected force. She valued authenticity above all else. Zara studied him, her gaze penetrating yet kind. Is that why you hide yours so carefully? The question might have offended him days earlier. Now it felt like an invitation to be seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. Authenticity is a liability in my world, he admitted. Revealing what you really want, what you really feel, it gives others leverage. That sounds exhausting, Zara observed. Constantly calculating, never just being. It is, Oliver agreed, another truth he'd never acknowledged aloud. I'm not sure I even know who I am without the strategy anymore. I'm starting to see glimpses, Zara replied, her smile creating a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. They continued working side by side, the space between them charged with growing awareness, with possibilities neither had anticipated when a storm brought them together. Evening brought a neighborhood gathering at the community center, a spontaneous celebration of survival and recovery. Tables groaned with potluck contributions. Children played in cleared spaces, and someone had rigged a sound system playing cheerful music. Oliver moved through the crowd with growing comfort, no longer the awkward outsider but increasingly a recognized participant in their collective recovery. He'd spent the day learning names, hearing stories, offering assistance, simple human connections that had been absent from his life for longer than he cared to admit. You're good with them, Zara noted, nodding toward a group of children who had just enlisted Oliver's help building a tower from plastic cups. They're easy to talk to, Oliver replied, watching the children's delight as their structure grew. No agendas, no power plays, just straightforward enthusiasm. Unlike the boardroom? Zara suggested with gentle teasing. Exactly unlike the boardroom, Oliver confirmed, his smile more relaxed than any she'd seen from him before. Though sometimes equally chaotic, the community had organized impromptu dancing, pushing tables aside to create space. Oliver watched as Zara was pulled into the circle by her students' parents, her natural grace evident as she moved to the music without self-consciousness. When she extended her hand toward him in clear invitation, he hesitated only briefly before accepting. Their fingers interlaced with unexpected rightness as she guided him into the dance. I should warn you, he murmured as they moved together. Corporate galas didn't prepare me for this kind of dancing. Stop thinking and just feel the music, Zara instructed, her body moving with natural rhythm. Not everything needs analysis and strategy. Oliver attempted to follow her advice, gradually releasing the rigid control that characterized his usual movements. Under Zara's guidance, her hand warm in his, her eyes encouraging rather than judging, he found himself relaxing into the moment, experiencing rather than calculating. The simple pleasure of moving to music with an attractive woman, something most people took for granted, felt revelatory to a man who had scheduled and optimized his life into sterile perfection. When the music shifted to a slower tempo, their bodies naturally drew closer. Oliver's hand found the small of her back, Zara's palm rested lightly on his shoulder, and the space between them hummed with awareness neither could deny. Stars emerged in the clearing sky as Oliver and Zara walked back to her home, the neighborhood quiet after celebrating its resilience. The physical distance between them had diminished throughout the evening, their shoulders occasionally brushing, their hands finding reasons for momentary contact. "Thank you," Oliver said as they reached her porch, the simple phrase containing depths he struggled to articulate. "For the dance?" Zara asked, her expression playful in the porch light. "For showing me possibilities I'd forgotten existed," he clarified, his voice low with sincerity. "Different ways of measuring success, of creating value, of connecting." Zara studied him, her eyes searching his with that penetrating gaze that had initially unsettled him but now felt essential, as if she alone could see past his carefully constructed facades to the person struggling to emerge. "You've surprised me, Oliver Hayes," she admitted, leaning against the porch railing. "When I recognized you that first morning, I expected corporate arrogance and impatience to return to your luxury bubble. Instead, you got manual labor and philosophical conversations," Oliver observed with a self-deprecating smile. "Instead, I got glimpses of the man beneath the CEO," Zara corrected. "Someone thoughtful, capable of growth, willing to question his assumptions." The approval in her voice affected him more deeply than any corporate accolade. Oliver found himself moving closer, drawn by something more powerful than strategic interest or physical attraction, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different paths. "The car service is confirmed for tomorrow morning," he said, the reminder bringing a shadow of impending separation. Back to reality, Zara nodded, something like regret crossing her features. "A different reality, I think," Oliver replied, his hand tentatively finding hers in the space between them. "Some changes don't wash away with the storm. Their fingers interlaced naturally, neither pulling away." Above them, the clouds continued dispersing, revealing more stars with each passing moment, nature's reminder that clarity often follows turbulence. As they stood together on the threshold between what had been and what might be, Oliver Hayes, who had built his empire on calculated risk and strategic planning, found himself facing the most consequential uncertainty of his life, whether the connection forged in extraordinary circumstances could possibly survive in the ordinary world they would soon re-enter. The question remained unspoken between them, but its presence was as tangible as the warmth of Zara's hand in his, and as promising as the clearing sky above. Dawn arrived with cruel clarity, sunlight illuminating a neighborhood already returning to normal routines. Debris had been cleared, power restored, floodwaters receded. With each passing hour, the extraordinary circumstances that had brought Oliver and Zara together dissolved into ordinary reality. The car service Oliver had arranged would arrive in 1 hour. His borrowed clothes, now washed and folded, would be exchanged for his dry-cleaned suit, still hanging in Zara's guest room. The physical transformation would be complete, returning Oliver Hayes to his proper packaging as surely as if the storm had never happened. In Zara's kitchen, they moved through a final shared breakfast, their conversation carrying the weight of impending separation. "Your office must be in chaos without you," Zara observed, pouring coffee into the now familiar dinosaur mug she'd assigned to him. "Miranda has probably called an emergency board meeting to discuss my mental health," Oliver confirmed with a wry smile. "Put my shares in jeopardy, because you questioned demolishing a children's hospital?" Zara's eyebrow raised. "That hardly seems grounds for competency hearings." "You don't understand corporate culture," Oliver replied. "Compassion reads as weakness. Reconsidering maximized profits appears as instability. The machine doesn't tolerate disruption, even from its creator." The realization had crystallized overnight. His company, originally built as an extension of his vision, had evolved into an entity with its own momentum, its own demands, its own hungry expectation of constant expansion regardless of human cost. "Then perhaps the machine needs redesigning," Zara suggested simply. The comment hung between them, a challenge that extended beyond hospitals and development projects to the fundamental structure of Oliver's existence. Redesigning the machine would mean dismantling and rebuilding the very foundation of his identity. Could he do that? More importantly, did he want to? Oliver's phone, finally charged and reconnected to service, vibrated continuously on the kitchen counter, each notification pulling him incrementally back toward his former life. Emails, 347. Missed calls, 62. Text messages, 118. the digital tethers of his position yanking him away from the simple connection he'd found in this modest home. "You should probably start answering those," Zara said, nodding toward the buzzing device, "before they send a search party." "Let them search," Oliver replied with unexpected defiance. "I'm not sure I want to be found just yet." The sentiment surprised them both, its honesty, its vulnerability, its implicit acknowledgement that something significant would be lost when he stepped back into his waiting car. "What exactly are you reluctant to leave?" Zara asked, her direct gaze challenging him to articulate feelings that remained nebulous even to himself. Oliver considered the question carefully. "Clarity," he said finally. "These past days have been the first time in years I've known exactly why I was doing something, could see the direct impact of my actions, felt connected to actual purpose. And in your normal life, everything is abstracted," Oliver admitted. "Money represents success rather than creating actual value. Buildings are assets rather than homes. People are resources rather than people." He gestured toward the window, where neighbors could be seen greeting each other, checking on repairs, sharing tools and supplies. "This community functions with purpose I can understand. My world operates on principles that suddenly feel hollow." Zara studied him thoughtfully. "The corporate world doesn't have to be soulless, Oliver. Some businesses create genuine value, serve real needs, operate with integrity." "Not mine," he replied, the admission painful but necessary. "Not for a long time." The weight of this recognition, that he had built an empire on principles he could no longer defend, settled heavily between them. The path forward remained unclear, but the impossibility of simply returning to his former perspective was absolute. They stepped onto Zara's porch, the morning sun warming the wooden boards beneath their feet. In the distance, a sleek black car turned onto the street, the service Oliver had arranged, arriving precisely on schedule. "Your chariot approaches," Zara noted, her attempt at lightness not quite masking the emotion beneath. Oliver nodded, feeling strangely unprepared despite knowing this moment was inevitable. The car represented more than transportation. It was the tangible boundary between the unexpected connection they'd formed and the separate realities awaiting them. "Zara," he began, turning toward her. "These past days have been extraordinary circumstances," she finished for him. "Storm dynamics, forced proximity, shared crisis. Is that all they were to you?" Oliver asked quietly. The directness of his question hung between them, demanding equal honesty in response. Zara's expression softened, her defenses lowering. "No," she admitted. "Not entirely." The acknowledgement, modest but significant, created an opening neither had anticipated when a storm brought a stranded CEO to a kindergarten teacher's door. "I don't want this to end," Oliver said simply. "Whatever this is, this exists in a bubble," Zara replied, though her eyes suggested she shared his reluctance. "Outside normal constraints and contexts, real life is messier, more complicated." "I'm good with complicated," Oliver countered, his hand finding hers with growing familiarity. "I specialize in complex negotiations." A smile touched Zara's lips. "Is that what we're doing? Negotiating?" "Exploring possibilities," Oliver clarified, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her palm. "Finding mutual benefit." "Very corporate of you," she teased, though her fingers tightened around his. The black car pulled to a stop in front of Zara's home, its gleaming surface and tinted windows a stark contrast to the modest neighborhood surroundings. The driver remained inside, awaiting his passenger with professional patience. "That's my world calling," Oliver observed, making no move toward the vehicle. "And you have to answer," Zara replied, understanding rather than resentment in her voice. "Responsibilities don't disappear during storms, but priorities can change because of them," Oliver countered. "Nothing looks the same to me now, including what matters most." The admission, simple yet profound, reflected transformation deeper than either had anticipated when they first met. The arrogant CEO who had knocked on Zara's door during a downpour had been washed away, revealing someone more complex, more questioning, more human. "What happens now?" Zara asked, the practical question addressing the impractical reality of their situation, a billionaire developer and a kindergarten teacher separated by worldviews, lifestyles, and a children's hospital one wanted to save and the other had planned to destroy. "Dinner," Oliver suggested, the ordinary proposal feeling extraordinary in context. "Tomorrow night, in the city, a proper date without power outages or natural disasters." Zara's smile held both warmth and caution. From storm shelter to dinner date. Quite a transition. I prefer to think of it as continuation, Oliver replied. Different setting, same connection. The car's driver honked gently, a respectful reminder of waiting obligations, of board meetings and investors and corporate machinery temporarily paused but not disbanded. You should go, Zara said softly. Reality awaits. A different reality than before, Oliver insisted, needing her to understand that their connection wasn't merely circumstantial, that something fundamental had shifted within him. As if to demonstrate this truth, he leaned forward with newfound courage, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that contained both question and promise. The question of whether what they'd found could survive beyond crisis, the promise that he was willing to find out. When they separated, Zara's expression held cautious hope rather than certainty, appropriate for two people standing at the threshold between extraordinary circumstances and ordinary life, between what had been and what might be. Tomorrow night, she confirmed. We'll see what survives in daylight. Oliver walked toward the waiting car, each step carrying him physically away from Zara, while his mind remained firmly anchored to possibilities that hadn't existed before the storm. As the driver opened the door, Oliver turned back once more, capturing the image of Zara on her porch, the woman who had sheltered him from one storm while creating another entirely within his carefully ordered existence. Some transformations, once begun, couldn't be reversed. Some connections, once formed, refused to be severed by mere circumstance. Some journeys, once started, demanded completion regardless of difficulty. As the car pulled away from the curb, Oliver Hayes faced his most challenging negotiation yet, reconciling the man he had been with the man he wished to become, for himself and for the woman watching him return to a world that no longer felt like home. The gleaming towers of Manhattan welcomed Oliver Hayes home with cold, reflective indifference. His penthouse, immaculate, designer perfect, utterly silent, felt like a museum dedicated to a person who no longer existed. He moved through the minimalist space, touching surfaces that cost more than Zara's entire home yet offered none of its warmth or character. The contrast was jarring. No mismatched mugs, no creaking floorboards, no evidence of human imperfection or lived experience. Just pristine emptiness, curated to impress rather than comfort. Oliver showered and changed into one of 20 identical custom suits, the familiar costume of corporate power settling on his shoulders with new awareness. The man in the mirror looked exactly as he had before the storm, impeccably groomed, perfectly tailored, projectively successful. Yet inside, tectonic plates had shifted. Hayes Enterprises headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a midtown skyscraper bearing the family name. As Oliver entered the executive floor, the machinery of corporate power hummed around him, assistants managing schedules, analysts preparing reports, lawyers drafting documents. The system he'd built continued functioning precisely as designed, even as its designer questioned its fundamental purpose. Oliver. Miranda Russell, his chief counsel, intercepted him before he reached his office. Thank goodness. The board is assembled in the conference room. Porter's prepared a detailed explanation of your unusual directives regarding St. Mary's. Explanation or rebuttal? Oliver asked mildly. Miranda's practice-neutral expression revealed nothing. The board has concerns about potential shareholder reactions to abandoning a project of this magnitude. I'm not abandoning anything, Oliver corrected, continuing toward the conference room. I'm transforming it into something better. The boardroom fell silent as Oliver entered. 12 impeccably dressed executives arranged around a table worth more than most employees' annual salaries. Their expressions ranged from concern to calculation, each measuring the potential impact of their CEO's apparent deviation from established protocol. Gentlemen. Ladies. Oliver greeted them with newfound clarity. Let's discuss the future of Hayes Enterprises. These revisions compromise the entire project's financial structure, James Porter concluded, displaying projected revenue reductions on the conference room screen. Incorporating the existing hospital reduces available square footage for luxury units by 38%, lowering expected returns significantly. Porter's presentation had been methodical, detailed, and entirely focused on maximizing profit, exactly the approach Oliver would have demanded a week earlier. Thank you, James, Oliver replied calmly. Now let me explain why these changes are essential to our company's future. He stood, buttoning his jacket in the familiar gesture that preceded important statements. The executive straightened instinctively, conditioned to recognize the signal. Hayes Enterprises has specialized in luxury development for 20 years, Oliver began. We've excelled at creating exclusive spaces for the extremely wealthy, properties that remain vacant much of the year while contributing to housing shortages. The board shifted uncomfortably. Such direct acknowledgement of their business model's social impact violated unspoken corporate norms. This strategy has generated substantial financial returns, Oliver continued, but at significant cost to communities, to our reputation, and ultimately to our long-term viability in a changing market. He walked to the window overlooking the city, a landscape he'd helped reshape through aggressive development. St. Mary's Children's Hospital will become the centerpiece of our new approach, not an obstacle to be removed, Oliver stated firmly. We'll renovate rather than demolish, modernize rather than replace, integrate rather than isolate. The Chinese consortium won't accept these changes, Porter objected. They expect maximum returns. Then we'll find partners who share our revised vision, Oliver replied. Investors exist who measure success by more than quarterly profits. You're talking about fundamentally altering our business model, Miranda cautioned. The board has fiduciary responsibility to consider. The board has responsibility to ensure this company's continued relevance and success, Oliver interrupted. Both require evolution rather than replication of past approaches. He returned to the table, meeting each board member's gaze directly. I've drafted a comprehensive plan incorporating these changes. Review it carefully. Those who share this vision have a place in Hayes Enterprises' future. Those who don't should consider their options. The ultimatum, delivered without anger but with absolute conviction, silenced further objections. Oliver Hayes hadn't built his empire by equivocation. The same decisive leadership that had created their profit-focused company would now redirect it towards something more balanced. Whether they would follow remained to be seen. 3 weeks passed in whirlwind activity. Oliver immersed himself in transforming not just the St. Mary's project but Hayes Enterprises itself. The intensity that had previously driven profit maximization now fueled a more nuanced approach to development. He visited St. Mary's personally, walking its corridors, meeting with medical staff, observing children receiving treatment. Each conversation deepened his commitment to preserving and enhancing the hospital, rather than replacing it. The revised development plan emerged. Luxury condominiums would still be built, but on a smaller scale and integrated with the renovated hospital. A percentage of units would be designated affordable housing for healthcare workers. Commercial spaces would prioritize businesses serving the medical community and patients' families. Most radical was the profit structure. Hayes Enterprises would limit its return on investment to 12%, with additional proceeds funding hospital improvements and community services. When the board finally voted on the restructured project, the result surprised even Oliver. 9 members supported the new direction, recognizing potential for sustainable growth and improved public perception. 3 resigned in protest, unwilling to compromise on maximized returns. Oliver accepted their departures without rancor. The company he envisioned required alignment of values more than preservation of personnel. Throughout these professional upheavals, one constant remained: dinner with Zara each evening she could travel into the city. Their connection, initially forged in crisis, deepened through conversation uninterrupted by power outages or emergency response duties. Oliver shared his struggles honestly, the resistance from investors, the skepticism from industry colleagues, the persistent question of whether transformation came too late. Zara listened without judgment, offering perspective without pressure, becoming his touchstone in an otherwise turbulent transition. I have something to show you, Oliver said as they finished dinner at a small restaurant near Central Park. His 5th date with Zara, each venue progressively less extravagant than he would have chosen before. Another revised hospital plan? Zara asked, growing accustomed to his enthusiasm for architectural renderings. Something more concrete, Oliver replied, a hint of nervousness unusual for the normally composed executive. A surprise, if you're willing. The car waiting outside transported them not to Oliver's penthouse or Hayes Enterprises headquarters, but to St. Mary's Children's Hospital itself. Though evening had fallen, construction lights illuminated sections of the building where renovation had already begun. You've started work, Zara observed, genuine surprise in her voice as they walked toward the entrance. Without final approvals? Some things shouldn't wait for bureaucracy, Oliver replied simply. The children's oncology ward needed immediate upgrades regardless of the larger project's timeline. Inside, Zara recognized the familiar corridors where she'd volunteered for years, now partially transformed. New medical equipment stood in refurbished treatment rooms. Fresh paint brightened previously institutional spaces. A completely renovated pediatric playroom featured interactive stations designed specifically for children with limited mobility. Oliver, Zara breathed, trailing her fingers along a custom bookshelf filled with new reading materials. This is incredible. There's more, he said, leading her to a newly created space adjacent to the reading nook. The door bore a simple plaque, Zara Washington Children's Library. "You named it after me?" Zara asked, visibly moved by the gesture. "The hospital board suggested it," Oliver explained. "You've given hundreds of hours to these children. This ensures your impact continues regardless of your volunteer schedule." As Zara explored the thoughtfully designed space, cozy reading corners, accessible shelving, comfortable seating for parents reading to patients, Oliver watched her reaction with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Financial gestures came easily to him. Personal ones remained unfamiliar territory. "This isn't just about the building, is it?" Zara asked finally, turning to face him fully. "It's about priorities," Oliver admitted. "About recognizing what actually matters and having the courage to change direction." In the quiet hospital corridor, surrounded by evidence of transformation both physical and personal, Oliver Hayes, who had once valued properties over people, acquisition over connection, reached for Zara's hand with newfound certainty about what constituted true wealth. Friends, we've journeyed with Oliver and Zara through storm and sunshine, through challenge and change. Their story reminds us that transformation is possible at any moment, that one encounter can redirect our path if we're willing to see with new eyes. What storm in your life might be washing away old certainties to reveal new truths? What unexpected shelter might be offering lessons you never knew you needed? If this story has touched your heart, subscribe now to Mr. Ross Story Trail. Each week, we explore these moments of human connection and growth that remind us what truly matters in this journey we call life. Hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and join our community of storytellers and truth seekers. Because the best stories, like Oliver and Zara's, don't end with happily ever after. They continue evolving, challenging us to grow alongside them. Now, let's return to that hospital corridor, where two people from different worlds have discovered that the greatest transformation isn't in buildings or businesses, but in hearts brave enough to change. In the months that followed, Hayes Enterprises underwent reformation more profound than market analysts could quantify. Oliver established new criteria for project selection, balancing profit with community impact. Development teams included community representatives with equal voice to financial advisors. Affordable housing components became standard in all residential properties. Industry peers watched with skepticism that gradually shifted to grudging interest as Hayes Properties maintained profitability while generating positive press and community support previously unknown in luxury development. St. Mary's Hospital expansion completed on schedule, its integration with thoughtfully designed residential and commercial spaces creating a neighborhood rather than merely a building complex. The project became a case study in responsive urban development, attracting attention from planners nationwide. Yet for Oliver Hayes, the most significant transformation remained personal. The man who had once measured success by acquisition discovered greater satisfaction in contribution. The executive who had prioritized isolation found unexpected richness in connection. And on evenings when corporate demands subsided, he could often be found in a children's hospital library, listening as a kindergarten teacher brought stories to life for young patients, his presence unremarkable except to the woman whose perspective had helped him rebuild not just a hospital, but himself. 3 months after the storm that changed everything, autumn painted Central Park in brilliant golds and crimsons. Oliver and Zara strolled along a winding path, hands intertwined with the easy familiarity of a connection that had deepened rather than diminished with time. "The board approved the Riverside project yesterday," Oliver mentioned, his voice reflecting satisfaction deeper than mere corporate achievement. 40% affordable housing, community spaces on the ground floor, and daycare facilities for residents. "Your father would be proud," Zara observed, squeezing his hand gently. "Building spaces where lives can unfold." Oliver nodded, the comparison meaningful rather than painful now. 3 months of intentional transformation had reshaped not just his business approach but his relationship with his own history. The development team actually visited the neighborhood first, he added with quiet pride. Listened to residents, incorporated their needs into the design. The final plan emerged from conversation rather than imposition. "Revolutionary concept," Zara teased. "Asking people what they need before telling them what they're getting." Oliver laughed, the sound coming more easily these days. Perhaps not revolutionary, but certainly revolutionary for Hayes Enterprises. They paused at a scenic overlook, watching children sailing toy boats across the pond below. The simple pleasure of an unhurried afternoon together remained novel for a man who had previously scheduled his life in 15-minute increments of productive activity. "How are your students adjusting to their celebrity teacher?" Oliver asked, referencing the media attention Zara had received when the innovative St. Mary's project made national news. They're disappointed I don't actually live at the hospital library, Zara replied with amusement, though they enjoy their monthly field trips there. Your reading corner design is apparently way cooler than our classroom version. High praise indeed, Oliver acknowledged, warmth spreading through him at the thought of kindergartners enjoying spaces he'd helped create, a form of validation entirely different from shareholder appreciation or industry awards. Life had found a new rhythm for both of them. Zara continued teaching, her classroom practices enriched by resources Oliver helped secure through educational grants rather than personal funds, a distinction she had insisted upon. Her volunteer hours at St. Mary's expanded through the dedicated space that bore her name, allowing more children access to literature during their treatment. Oliver still led Hayes Enterprises, but with radically altered priorities. The company's mission statement, rewritten with input from all levels of employees, now emphasized creating integrated communities that enhance lives rather than premium properties that maximize returns. Quarterly meetings evaluated social impact alongside financial performance, with bonuses tied to both metrics. Not every change came easily. 3 major investors had withdrawn support, uncomfortable with limited profit margins. Industry peers still questioned Oliver's idealistic phase, predicting eventual return to conventional development strategies. Former colleagues avoided him at functions, as if conscious business practices might prove contagious. Yet unexpected allies emerged. Young architects and urban planners sought positions at Hayes Enterprises, eager to create meaningful projects. Community organizations previously antagonistic toward development became collaborative partners. A new generation of socially conscious investors provided capital with patience for measured, sustainable returns. Most significant was Oliver's personal transformation. The man who once inhabited multiple properties now spent most evenings in a modest brownstone he'd purchased near Zara's neighborhood, close enough for convenience yet maintaining independent spaces they both valued. The residence, though renovated for comfort, retained original character rather than imposing sterile luxury, evidence of his evolving aesthetic priorities. The hospital board wants to recognize you at their annual fundraiser, Zara mentioned as they continued walking. They're calling the new approach the Hayes model for community integrated healthcare facilities. Recognition should go to the medical staff, Oliver demurred. They're the ones providing actual value. The facilities matter too, Zara reminded him. Children heal better in spaces designed for their comfort. Families manage crisis better when surroundings reduce rather than increase stress. As sunset approached, they found themselves at a community garden similar to the one where they had worked together during the storm. This one, however, occupied previously vacant land adjacent to a Hayes Enterprises building, space formerly designated for executive parking now transformed into urban agriculture. From luxury cars to lettuce, Oliver observed with satisfaction. Much better use of valuable soil. Speaking of transformation, Zara said, Eleanor called yesterday. The community center needs a new roof again. Something about faulty materials from the post-storm repair? Oliver nodded thoughtfully. I'll have our maintenance team evaluate it, though I suspect Eleanor has already solved the problem and simply wants to check if I'm still paying attention. You passed her test, Zara confirmed with a smile. She said to tell you you're officially a neighborhood fixture now, not just Zara's fancy boyfriend. The designation, both the neighborhood fixture and the boyfriend, created warmth that had nothing to do with status or acquisition. Oliver Hayes, who had spent decades accumulating properties and power, found himself valuing belonging more than ownership, connection more than control. There's a community dinner next weekend, Zara added. Eleanor's making her famous lasagna. We'll bring dessert, Oliver replied without hesitation, the we flowing naturally now, though perhaps not from that bakery we tried last week. Agreed, Zara laughed. No more experimental fusion pastries. Their conversation continued as daylight faded, discussing neighborhood projects, hospital improvements, classroom challenges, the ordinary concerns of lives increasingly intertwined yet respectful of individual purposes. For Oliver, who had once measured days by deals closed and assets acquired, this simple exchange about community dinners and dessert preferences represented wealth no balance sheet could calculate. My friends, our journey with Oliver and Zara reaches its conclusion, but their story, like all meaningful transformations, continues beyond where we leave them. The wealthy CEO who found shelter from a storm discovered something far more valuable than any property in his portfolio: authentic connection, purposeful contribution, and the courage to redefine success. What treasures might be waiting in unexpected places in your own life? What storms might actually be clearing your path toward more meaningful connections? What transformations might be possible if you, like Oliver, find the courage to question your foundations? If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail. Each week, we explore these profound human journeys that remind us what truly matters isn't what we possess, but who we become and how we connect. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who might need this reminder about life's true valuations. Your support allows us to continue bringing these meaningful narratives to our growing community. Remember, friends, sometimes the most valuable redirections in our lives arrive disguised as inconveniences, and sometimes the most important connections form when we least expect them. Until our next journey together, this is Mr. Ross, wishing you authentic connections and the courage to grow through every storm. As darkness settled over the city, Oliver and Zara made their way toward a favorite neighborhood restaurant, a family-owned establishment rather than the exclusive venues Oliver had once frequented. The owner greeted them by name, leading them to a corner table where conversation could flow without interruption. "I received an interesting offer today," Oliver mentioned after they had ordered. "A publishing company wants me to write about corporate transformation, from profit to purpose or something equally cliched. You should consider it," Zara encouraged. "Your perspective could influence others in similar positions." "Perhaps," Oliver acknowledged, "though I'm still learning myself. The path isn't always clear." "The best teachers are fellow students," Zara replied, the educator in her emerging. "Authenticity matters more than perfection." Their conversation drifted to future possibilities. Projects they might undertake together, ways their distinct talents might complement each other in service to their shared values. Nothing definitive, nothing rushed, just exploration of potential with mutual respect for individual journeys. Later, walking Zara to her door, a ritual that had become cherished routine rather than obligatory courtesy, Oliver paused to really see the woman who had catalyzed his transformation. Not just her physical presence, though he found that increasingly captivating, but the essential quality she embodied, authenticity aligned with purpose. "What?" Zara asked, noticing his thoughtful gaze. "Just appreciating the storm that brought me to your door," Oliver replied honestly. "Best navigation error of my life." As their lips met in the gentle kiss of established connection rather than new discovery, Oliver Hayes, who had once built an empire of empty luxury, understood with perfect clarity that true wealth wasn't measured in properties acquired or deals completed. It resided in moments like this, standing on an ordinary porch with an extraordinary woman, feeling for perhaps the first time in his adult life that he was exactly where he belonged, building something that would outlast any structure, creating value no balance sheet could capture. The man who had once possessed everything without fulfillment now found fulfillment in what couldn't be possessed, only experienced, nurtured, and cherished. The transformation wasn't complete, such journeys never truly ended, but the direction was unmistakable. From acquisition to connection, from isolation to community, from empire building to life building, the most valuable redevelopment project of his career